They say an alpha's greatest weakness isn't the enemy at his gates, it's the mate he leaves bleeding in the mud while he walks away with another woman. Tonight, I'm telling you about Celine Vale, a Luna who died on a battlefield, not from rogue claws, but from the coldest wound of all, abandonment by the one man sworn to protect her. This isn't a fairy tale. This is about what happens when power chooses glamour over loyalty, and how a queen rises from the ashes of betrayal. Stay until the end. You'll want to see how this shatters everything you thought you knew about second chances. And hey, drop a like and comment your city below. Let me know where my wolf pack is watching from tonight. The rain came down like nails. Celine Vale pressed her palm against the gash, splitting her abdomen open, blood threading between her fingers in hot rivulets that mixed with mud and rainwater. The battlefield stank of death, copper and wet earth, and the acrid smoke from fires still burning in the eastern watchtowers. Bodies everywhere, rogues and pack warriors tangled together in the dirt, their eyes already glazing over with that peculiar emptiness that came when the soul departed and left only meat behind. She tried to breathe, but her lungs wouldn't cooperate. Each inhale felt like swallowing glass. Around her, the surviving Shadowfang warriors were pulling back, dragging their wounded toward the tree line, where the healers had set up their triage stations. Someone was screaming, a high, thin sound that scraped against her eardrums. She couldn't tell if it was victory or agony. Maybe both. The rogues were retreating, finally, after 3 hours of brutal combat that had turned the northern border into an abattoir. They'd won. At least that's what it looked like. Celine's vision swam. She blinked hard, trying to focus. Her wolf was silent inside her, too damaged to offer even a whisper of comfort. That scared her more than the wound. Aluna's wolf was supposed to be her anchor, her strength. Right now, Celine felt like she was floating untethered in dark water, sinking slow. She'd led the left flank herself when the rogues broke through the barrier wards. 30 warriors under her command, moving fast through the chaos to plug the breach before the enemy could pour into the heartlands. They'd held, barely. But the cost had been steep. She'd taken a rogue alpha's claws across her torso when she'd thrown herself between him and a young warrior who'd stumbled. The kid lived. She wasn't sure she would. Where was Kael, her mate, her alpha king? The man who was supposed to be her other half, connected by a bond that should have had him feeling every ounce of her pain right now through their link. Celine tried to reach for him mentally, sending out a desperate thread of consciousness through the bond they shared. Nothing. Just static and cold emptiness, like shouting into a void. She turned her head, mud squelching under her cheek. Through the rain and smoke, she could make out the command tent about 50 yards away, the black and silver banners of House Draven hanging limp and sodden. That's where he'd be, coordinating the defense, directing the warriors, doing what an Alpha King did during battle. But then, why couldn't she feel him? Footsteps splashed toward her. Celine's heart lurched with relief until she saw who it was. Not Kael, but Marcus, the pack's beta. His face was streaked with blood and soot, his armor dented, but his eyes held something worse than exhaustion when he looked down at her. Pity. Marcus, she tried to say, but it came out as a wet cough. Blood on her lips now, the taste of iron coating her tongue. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, hands hovering over her wound like he was afraid to touch it. Luna, gods, we need to get you to the healers. Where is he? The words scraped out of her throat. Where's Kael? The beta's jaw tightened, his gaze slid away from hers. That's when Celine knew. She knew before Marcus said a word. Before he opened his mouth and let the truth spill out in a voice that sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. She knew in that animal way prey knows when the predator has already chosen someone else to chase. He left, Marcus said quietly. About 20 minutes ago. Celine's mind went blank. Left? There was an attack at the southern border, Marcus continued, the words coming faster now like he needed to get them out before they poisoned him. A smaller one. Lyra Ashwin was there with her unit, and they got hit hard. Kael took a dozen warriors and rode south to save her, Celine finished. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Lyra Ashwin. Of course it was Lyra Ashwin. The name sat in Celine's chest like a stone. Kael's former lover. The woman who'd held his heart before fate had cruelly intervened and made Celine his mate instead. Lyra was everything Celine wasn't. A warrior born and bred, with a wolf as fierce as winter storms, and beauty that turned heads in every room she entered. Tall and golden and sharp, like a blade that knew its own worth. Celine had never hated her. That was the worst part. She'd tried to befriend Lyra when she'd first arrived at court as Kael's new Luna, tried to bridge the awkwardness of replacing someone who clearly still held a piece of the Alpha King's attention. But Lyra had looked at her with those cold amber eyes and said, "You're nothing but a bond he can't break, little Luna. Don't mistake that for love." 2 years. 2 years of Celine trying to prove herself worthy. 2 years of Kael keeping her at arm's length, polite but distant, performing his duties as a mate but never giving her the warmth she craved. 2 years of watching him light up whenever Lyra entered a room, his whole body angling toward her like a flower tracking the sun. And now this. Now when Celine lay dying in the mud, her blood painting the ground red, Kael had chosen to ride away, had chosen Lyra over his own mate. The bond should have compelled him to come to her, should have made it physically painful to leave while she suffered. But Kael Draven was an Alpha King, and Alpha Kings had will strong enough to override even the most sacred of magical ties when they wanted to badly enough. He wanted Lyra more than he wanted to save his dying mate. "I need you to listen to me," Marcus said urgently. He'd stripped off his cloak and was pressing it against her wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. The pressure made Celine gasp. "You're going to survive this. Do you hear me? You're strong. You've always been strong." "I'm weak," Celine whispered. She could feel it now, the truth settling into her bones. "That's what he thinks. That I'm too weak to be his queen. That's not—" "It is." Her laugh came out broken. "Look at me, Marcus. I'm no warrior. I'm just a girl from a minor pack who got lucky with a bond. Or unlucky, depending on how you look at it." She closed her eyes. The rain felt almost warm now against her skin. That was bad. That meant she was going into shock, her body starting to shut down. Through the roar of blood in her ears, she heard Marcus shouting for a healer, his voice cracking with desperation. But the healers were overwhelmed, triaging dozens of warriors who'd been injured in the battle. How long would it take for one of them to reach her? 10 minutes? 20? She didn't have 20 minutes. Celine's thoughts drifted, untethered. She thought about the first time she'd met Kael, 3 years ago at the annual summit of Pax. She'd been nobody then, just the daughter of a minor alpha from the Western Territories, invited out of courtesy more than respect. And then their eyes had met across the Great Hall, and the bond had snapped into place with the force of a thunderclap, undeniable and absolute. She'd thought it was fate, thought maybe the moon goddess had finally given her a purpose, a place where she belonged. Kael had looked at her like she'd just ruined his life. Later, after the shock had worn off and the political implications had been discussed at length by advisors and pack elders, he'd pulled her aside. His voice had been carefully neutral when he said, "I won't reject you. That would weaken both our packs. But don't expect this to be a love match, Celine. I had plans. I had someone. And now I have you instead." She should have run then, should have rejected him first and spared herself the slow torture of loving someone who wished she didn't exist. But she'd been young and stupid and convinced she could make him love her if she just tried hard enough. If she was good enough, kind enough, useful enough. If she could prove that a Luna didn't have to be a warrior to have value. Now she was dying alone in the mud while he rode off to save another woman, and she finally understood. You couldn't make someone choose you. You could only accept that they never would. "Luna!" A new voice, high and frightened. Celine forced her eyes open to see a young healer, barely more than a girl, really, sliding to her knees in the mud beside Marcus. The healer's hands were already glowing with soft green light, the healing magic of their kind. But when those glowing hands touched Celine's wound, the girl's face went pale. "This is bad," the healer breathed. She looked up at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. "Beta, this is really bad. The damage is too deep. I can't reach it all. She needs a full healing circle, multiple healers working together, and even then get them," Marcus snarled. "They're all occupied with critical cases." "She is a critical case. She's your Luna." The healer flinched. I know, I'm sorry." She turned back to Celine, pressing both palms flat against her abdomen. The green light intensified, warmth flooding through Celine's body as the magic worked to knit flesh and seal blood vessels. But it wasn't enough. Even Celine could tell that. The pain was still there, sharp and insistent, and her breathing was getting shallower by the second. "You're going to be okay," the young healer whispered, though her voice shook. "You're going to be fine, Luna. Just hold on." Celine wanted to tell her it was all right, that she'd done her best, that some wounds couldn't be healed with magic. But before she could speak, the darkness rose up and swallowed her whole. When Celine woke, she thought she was dead. The afterlife looked a lot like the healing tent, apparently. Canvas ceiling overhead, the smell of herbs and antiseptic, low voices murmuring nearby. She tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her entire torso. Not dead then, just extremely damaged. "Easy," a voice said to her left. A woman's voice, older, with the kind of authority that came from years of telling people what to do. "You've been unconscious for 8 hours. Don't try to sit up yet." Celine turned her head slowly. The woman sitting beside her cot was Chief Healer Mira, the most senior medical practitioner in the Shadowfang pack. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her face lined with exhaustion. "How bad?" Celine managed to croak out. Mira's expression was carefully neutral. "You lost a lot of blood. The wound to your abdomen damaged several organs. We had to put you in a full healing circle for 3 hours straight just to stabilize you." She paused. "You should be dead, Luna. The fact that you're not is either a miracle or sheer stubbornness." Celine tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. Probably stubbornness. The healer's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You'll need several more sessions over the next few days, complete bed rest for at least a week, maybe 2. And no shifting. Your wolf is too depleted right now. Trying to change forms would kill you." "Understood." Celine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since she woke. "Has the Alpha King returned?" The temperature in the tent seemed to drop. Mira stood abruptly, busying herself with arranging medical supplies on a nearby table. "He's still in the south," she said without looking at Celine, "dealing with the aftermath of the attack there." "How long ago did that attack end?" The healer's shoulders tensed. "This morning, around dawn." Celine glanced toward the tent opening. Sunlight streamed through, bright and cheerful, completely at odds with the cold spreading through her chest. "So it's afternoon now?" "Yes. And he hasn't come back to check on his mate who nearly died in battle?" Silence. Then Mira turned, and the look on her face was something Celine had never seen from the usually stoic healer. It was anger, hot and fierce and barely contained. "That male," Mira said quietly, "is a fool." She moved back to Celine's bedside and sat down heavily. When she spoke again, her voice was low enough that only Celine could hear. "I've been chief healer of this pack for 30 years. I served Kyle's father before him, and his grandfather before that. I've seen a lot of alphas in my time, good ones, bad ones, and everything in between." She leaned forward. "But I have never, in all my years, seen an alpha abandon his dying mate on a battlefield to ride off and save his ex-lover. Not once." Celine felt her throat tighten. Maybe the southern attack was worse than... "It wasn't," Mira interrupted flatly. "I've spoken to warriors who were there. It was a skirmish, 15 rogues, maybe 20, over in less than an hour with minimal casualties." She shook her head. "He didn't rush south because Lyra needed him. He rushed south because he wanted an excuse to go to her." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Celine wanted to defend Kyle, wanted to say that surely he wouldn't be so cruel, so calculating, but she couldn't make her mouth form the lies. Because deep down, she knew Mira was right. The worst part wasn't even the leaving. It was the fact that she wasn't surprised. "What do I do?" Celine whispered. Mira reached out and took her hand, squeezing firmly. "You survive, girl. That's what you do. You heal, and you get stronger, and you decide what kind of Luna you want to be. Because right now you have a choice. You can keep waiting for a male who doesn't value you, or you can start valuing yourself." Before Celine could respond, the tent flap opened and Marcus entered. His face was grim as he approached her cot. "Luna," he said carefully, "there's something you need to know." Celine's stomach sank. "What now?" Marcus glanced at Mira, who gave him a slight nod. He turned back to Celine. Word is spreading through the pack about what happened, about the Alpha King leaving during the battle. The warriors who saw it, they're talking. People are questioning his judgment, his priorities. Celine closed her eyes. Of course they were. Pack politics was a vicious game, and weakness was blood in the water. There's more, Marcus continued grimly. Kale returned an hour ago. He's back at the palace now. Relief and fury warred in Celine's chest. Then why isn't he here? Marcus's jaw worked. Because he's with Lyra. She came back with him, and from what I'm hearing, they've been in his private chamber since they arrived. The silence that followed was deafening. Celine felt something crack inside her. Not her heart, that had been breaking slowly for 2 years. This was different. This was the final, decisive snap of whatever thread had been holding her together. The moment when hope died and something colder took its place. I see, she said quietly. Luna, Marcus started. I'd like to be alone now. The beta looked like he wanted to argue, but Mira stood and placed a hand on his arm. Give her space, she said softly. They left together, speaking in low voices that Celine couldn't make out. She stared at the canvas ceiling and tried to feel something other than numbness. She'd almost died, had spent hours unconscious while healers worked frantically to keep her alive. And her mate, her fated mate, the one the moon goddess herself had chosen for her, had come home and gone straight to another woman's arms. The bond between them was still there, a golden thread connecting their souls, but it felt thin now. Fragile. Like it might snap if she pulled too hard. Maybe it should snap. Maybe that would hurt less than this. 3 days passed. Celine remained in the healing tent, going through the painful process of recovery while the pack buzzed with gossip and speculation. Mira kept her updated on everything, the casualty counts from the battle, the state of the northern border, the mood among the warriors, and the fact that Kyle still hadn't visited his mate. He sent messages, of course, formal, carefully worded notes delivered by servants asking about her health and recovery. But he never came himself, never sat by her bedside or held her hand or looked her in the eye and explained why he'd left her dying in the mud. Lyra, meanwhile, had taken up residence in the palace, in the guest wing, supposedly, but everyone knew she spent most of her time in Kael's private quarters. The warriors talked about it in whispers. The servants exchanged knowing looks, and Celine lay in her cot feeling like the world's biggest fool. On the 4th day, Marcus finally lost his patience. He burst into the healing tent around midday, his face thunderous. This is ridiculous, he announced. I'm going to drag him here myself if I have to. Celine, who'd been sitting up for the first time that morning with Mira's help, shook her head. Don't. Don't? Luna, he's your mate. He should be here. He should have been here days ago. But he doesn't want to be here, does he? Celine's voice was calm, steady. She'd had 4 days to process her anger, and it had crystallized into something cold and hard in her chest. And I'm done begging for scraps of his attention. Marcus stared at her. Then what are you going to do? I don't know yet. She looked down at her hands, still pale from blood loss, but steady now. But I know I can't keep living like this. Can't keep pretending that if I'm just good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, he'll eventually love me the way I love him. Do you love him? Mira asked quietly from her position by the medicine cabinet, even after everything he's done. Celine thought about it, really thought about it. I love who I thought he could be, she said finally, but that person doesn't exist. The real Kale Draven left me to die so he could play hero for a woman he's never gotten over. She met Marcus's eyes. That's not love. That's not even respect. So no, I don't think I love him anymore. I think I just love the idea of being chosen for once in my life. The beta's expression softened. You were chosen, Luna. The bond is just magic, Celine interrupted. It doesn't guarantee love. It doesn't guarantee anything except a supernatural connection that apparently isn't strong enough to override his feelings for someone else. She took a shaky breath. So I'm done fighting against it, done trying to be something I'm not. Then what will you be? Marcus asked. Celine didn't have an answer for that. Not yet. But that evening, everything changed. She was alone in the tent. Mira had gone to check on other patients when she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy footsteps, measured and confident. The kind that belonged to someone who'd never questioned their right to go wherever they pleased. The tent flap opened, and Kyle Draven walked in. Celine's breath caught despite herself. She hadn't seen him in over a week. He'd been away on a diplomatic mission when the rogue attacks started. And gods, he was still beautiful, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that fell to his collar and silver eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. The kind of masculine beauty that was almost painful to look at. He stopped a few feet from her cot, hands hanging loose at his sides. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Kyle said, "You look better." 3 words. Not, "I'm sorry I abandoned you," not, "I was terrified you'd die." Just an observation delivered in the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. Celine felt her remaining hope shrivel and die. "I'll live," she said flatly. "No thanks to you." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I had to make a tactical decision." "You had to choose," she corrected, "between saving your mate and saving your lover. And we both know which one mattered more to you." Lyra's unit was under heavy attack. For less than an hour, with minimal casualties. She kept her voice level with effort. "While I was bleeding out from defending the northern border that you ordered me to hold." "But sure, Kyle. Tell me more about your tactical decision." His silver eyes flashed. "What do you want me to say, Celine, that I made a mistake?" "Fine. I should have sent someone else south. I should have come to you first. Is that what you need to hear?" "What I need," she said quietly, "is a mate who doesn't have to be told that his dying wife takes priority over his ex-girlfriend. What I need is a partner who actually wants me instead of resenting me for existing." She met his gaze steadily. "But we both know that's not what I have." Kale's face went carefully blank, that shuttered expression he wore when he was trying to hide what he was really feeling. "If you're asking me to cut Lyra out of my life, I'm not asking you for anything anymore." The words came out exhausted. "Empty. I'm done asking." "Then what is this?" His voice rose slightly. "Are you threatening to leave? To break the bond? Can I?" She tilted her head. "Can either of us actually break a mate bond?" "I don't think so. We're stuck with each other, Kyle. Stuck by magic that neither of us really wanted." "That's not true." He took a step closer. "When we first bonded, I thought I was planning to make it work. To try. Were you? Or were you just doing damage control?" She watched his face carefully. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last 2 years keeping me at arm's length while inviting your ex-lover to every pack function and private dinner. You've made it very clear that I'm your mate by obligation, not by choice." "Celine." He reached for her. She flinched back. "Don't." The rejection hit him like a physical blow. She could see it in the way his hand froze midair, the way his eyes widened slightly. "When did you stop wanting me to touch you?" he asked quietly. "When I realized you only touched me out of duty. When I figured out that every time you held my hand or kissed my forehead in public, you were thinking about her." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I may not be a warrior or a great beauty, but I'm not an idiot. I know what it looks like when a male is in love. And that's not what you look like when you look at me." Kale's face hardened. "You want me to lie? Pretend I don't have feelings for Lyra?" "No." She shook her head. "I want you to be honest about what this is. We're mates because fate decided we should be. But we're not partners. We're not even really friends. We're just 2 people trapped in a bond that's making both of us miserable." He didn't deny it. That silence spoke louder than any words could have. Celine felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I defended your border," she said softly. "I led warriors into battle and nearly died protecting your people. Our people. And you left me bleeding in the mud to go save a woman who isn't even your mate." She swallowed hard. "What does that say about us, Kyle?" "It says I made a mistake," he ground out. "It says you made a choice, and that choice told me everything I needed to know about where I stand in your life." She looked away. "So do what you want. Keep Lyra close, bring her to live in the palace officially, make her your mistress if that's what you need. But stop pretending you want me for anything other than political stability." When she looked back at him, his expression was cold, distant. "If that's how you see things," he said quietly, "then maybe you're right. Maybe we're both just stuck." He turned and walked out without another word. Celine sat very still in the silence that followed, her hands clenched in her lap. She'd wanted honesty, and she'd gotten it. The brutal, ugly truth that she'd been avoiding for 2 years. Kyle Draven didn't love her, would never love her, and she was done breaking her heart trying to change that. Word spread through the pack like wildfire. The Alpha King and Luna had fought, badly enough that he'd walked away instead of staying to comfort his still recovering mate. The gossip was relentless. Celine heard it from the servants who brought her meals, saw it in the pitying looks from the younger healers. Everyone had an opinion about what it meant, what would happen next. Some said Kyle would formally take Lyra as his mistress. Others whispered that Celine should challenge Lyra to ritual combat for the Alpha's affections. A few brave souls suggested maybe Celine should just leave. Mira shooed them all away with the ferocity of a mother bear protecting her cub, but even she couldn't stop the speculation entirely. On her 7th day in the healing tent, Celine was finally cleared to return to her chambers in the palace. Marcus came to escort her personally, bringing a carriage since she still couldn't walk long distances without getting winded. The palace looked the same as always: massive stone walls, gleaming windows, guards posted at regular intervals. But it felt different now, like a cage instead of a home. Marcus helped her down from the carriage and into the main entrance. As they crossed the great hall, Celine felt eyes on her from every direction. Warriors and servants watching her pass with expressions ranging from sympathy to curiosity to something that might have been respect. She kept her head high and her face neutral until they reached the Luna's wing. Her chambers were exactly as she'd left them, elegant and comfortable and completely impersonal. She'd never really made this space her own in 2 years of living here, had always felt like a guest rather than the lady of the house. Marcus lingered in the doorway. "If you need anything—" "I know. Thank you, Marcus." He hesitated. "Luna, for what it's worth, I think the pack is starting to see you differently. The way you fought in that battle, the way you've handled the aftermath, people are noticing." "Noticing what?" "That you're stronger than anyone gave you credit for, including the Alpha King." He gave her a small bow. "Get some rest." After he left, Celine sank onto the couch and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The exhaustion, the heartbreak, the bitter disappointment of realizing she'd wasted 2 years of her life on a man who would never choose her. She should have been crying, should have been destroyed. Instead, she felt nothing. Just a hollow numbness where her heart used to be. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. A servant girl entered with a tray of food. As she set it down, she wouldn't quite meet Celine's eyes. "Is there something else?" Celine asked. The girl bit her lip. "I'm not supposed to tell you this, Luna, but I thought you should know." "Know what?" "The Alpha King is hosting a private dinner tonight in his personal dining room." She paused. "Lady Lyra is the only guest." Of course she was. Celine nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." After the girl left, Celine stared at the untouched food and made a decision. She was done being the patient, understanding Luna who waited for scraps of her mate's attention. Done being the weak link in Kyle's perfect court. Done letting Lyra Ashwin and her golden beauty and warrior prowess make her feel less than. If Kyle wanted Lyra so badly, he could have her, and Celine would figure out who she was without him. The next morning, Celine requested a meeting with the Pack Council. It was an unusual move. Lunas typically didn't involve themselves in pack politics unless specifically asked, but Celine was tired of playing by rules that kept her powerless. The council chamber was a circular room with a massive table carved from ancient oak, 12 seats for 12 council members, plus an elevated seat for the Alpha King and a slightly lower seat beside him for the Luna. When Celine entered, 7 of the 12 council members were already present. They rose when they saw her, surprise evident on their faces. "Luna Vale," the eldest counselor said. "We weren't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "I'm calling for a formal session," Celine said calmly. Under Pack Law, Article 7, which states that any member of the ruling family may request an emergency council meeting regarding matters of pack security. The counselors exchanged glances. "You want to discuss pack security?" Another asked carefully. "I want to discuss what happened at the northern border," Celine clarified, "and why 30 warriors under my command are dead because we didn't have adequate reinforcements." That brought a stunned silence. Luna, one of the younger counselors, a woman named Vera, said slowly, "Are you saying the Alpha King made tactical errors during the battle?" I'm saying that decisions were made that cost lives. And as Luna of this pack, I have a right to examine those decisions and propose changes so it doesn't happen again. It was a bold move, potentially a dangerous one. But Celine was done playing it safe. The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Then the eldest nodded. Very well, Lunavale. We'll convene a full session tomorrow at midday. You'll need to present your case formally with evidence and witnesses. I'll be ready. As she left the chamber, Celine felt a flutter of something in her chest. Not happiness, exactly. More like determination. Purpose. For 2 years, she'd tried to be the perfect, unobtrusive Luna. She'd stayed out of pack politics, deferred to Kael on all major decisions, made herself as small and inoffensive as possible. And what had that gotten her? Abandonment and humiliation. Maybe it was time to try something different. The news of Celine's council petition spread through the palace within hours. By evening, Kael was at her door. She didn't invite him in, just stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and waited for him to speak. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. "Exercising my rights as Luna, by challenging my military decisions in front of the council?" His silver eyes were blazing. "You're undermining my authority." "Your authority got 30 warriors killed," Celine said coolly, including 2 teenagers who'd just earned their warrior marks. "So yes, I'm challenging your decisions. Someone should. You have no experience in military strategy. And you have no loyalty to your mate." She met his glare with one of her own. "Seems like we both have weaknesses, Kael." His jaw worked. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." She started to close the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have testimony to prepare." Kael caught the door. "Celine, if you do this, there's no going back. The council will see you as a political player, not just a Luna. You'll be a target." "Good." She smiled without humor. "Better a target than a ghost." She closed the door in his face. Behind the wood, she heard him stand there for a long moment. Then finally, footsteps walking away. Celine leaned against the door and let out a shaky breath. Her heart was racing, adrenaline singing through her veins. That had been terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in 2 years, she'd stood up to him. Really stood up to him, not just accepted his decisions with quiet hurt. It felt like waking up after a long sleep. The council session the next day was brutal. Celine presented her case with Marcus's help. Testimony from warriors who'd been at the northern border, medical reports showing the severity of the attack, strategic maps showing where reinforcements should have been positioned. And then she dropped the real bomb, evidence that Kael had known about the northern attack for almost 20 minutes before he decided to ride south instead. 20 minutes where he could have sent additional forces to support Celine's position, but hadn't, because he'd been waiting to see how bad the southern attack was first. The council chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. Kael, sitting rigid in his elevated seat, looked like he wanted to strangle someone, probably her. "This is a betrayal," he said quietly when the room finally quieted. "By my own mate." "This is accountability," Celine corrected. She stood at the center of the chamber, still weak from her injuries but refusing to show it. "I'm not questioning your ability to lead, Alpha King. I'm questioning one specific decision that cost lives, including nearly mine." Several council members nodded. Vera, the younger counselor, actually spoke up in Celine's defense. "The Luna has a point," she said carefully. "The tactical reports do show that the northern border was under heavier assault than the southern one. Perhaps a different deployment of forces would have been more effective." "Are you all forgetting who leads this pack?" Kael's voice was dangerously soft. "I am the Alpha King. My decisions aren't subject to committee review every time someone disagrees with them. They are when those decisions violate basic pack defense protocols," the eldest counselor said. He looked at Kael with something like disappointment. "We're not questioning your authority, Majesty, but the Luna has raised valid concerns that deserve examination." The vote, when it came, was 7-5 in Celine's favor. The council agreed to establish a new protocol requiring multiple backup plans for any large-scale battle, with automatic reinforcement deployment if the Alpha King was incapacitated or unavailable. It was a small victory. But it was a victory. When the session ended, Kael left without a word. Celine watched him go and felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow awareness that she'd just made an enemy of her own mate. But maybe they'd been enemies all along. Maybe she'd just been too hopeful to see it. Marcus approached her as the chamber emptied. "That was brave," he said quietly. "Stupid, but brave." Celine managed a weak smile. "Story of my life. What happens now?" "Now we see if Kael forgives me or declares me a traitor." She turned to face the beta. "What do you think?" Marcus's expression was grim. "I think you just became a player in a very dangerous game, Luna. And I think there are people in this palace who are not going to be happy about that. Meaning Lyra? Meaning everyone who benefits from keeping you small and powerless." He looked at her seriously. "Watch your back. The court is full of vipers and you just painted a target on yourself." As they left the council chamber together, Celine caught sight of a familiar figure at the end of the corridor. Lyra Ashwin, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and a small smile on her beautiful face. Their eyes met, and Lyra's smile widened into something sharp and predatory. Celine felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In fact, she had the terrible feeling it was just beginning. That night, alone in her chambers, Celine stood at the window and looked out over the packlands. Lights twinkled in the distance, homes and guard posts and taverns where warriors gathered to drink and trade stories. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Kael was probably with Lyra, probably explaining what had happened in the council session, probably being comforted by her while he complained about his difficult, ungrateful mate. The bond between them ached dully in her chest, not with longing, but with the pain of something dying slowly. Celine pressed her palm against the glass and made herself a promise. She would survive this. Would survive Kael's betrayal and Lyra's schemes and the pack's judgment. Would survive and become something more than just the weak Luna everyone had written off. She didn't know how yet. Didn't know what she would have to sacrifice or who she would have to become. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was done being abandoned. Done being left behind while others decided her worth. From now on, Celine Vale would write her own story, even if that meant burning the old one to ashes first. The knock came 3 hours past midnight. Celine had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep when the sharp rap on her chamber door jolted her awake. She sat up, heart pounding, reaching instinctively for the dagger she'd started keeping under her pillow since the rogue attack. "Luna Vale!" A male voice called urgently through the door. "Please, you need to come quickly." She recognized the voice. One of Marcus's junior warriors, a young man named Derek. Celine grabbed a robe and opened the door. Derek's face was pale in the torchlight. "What's happened?" "It's the Alpha King," he said breathlessly. "There's been an incident. You need to come to the East Tower immediately." Celine's stomach dropped. What kind of incident? But Derek was already running down the corridor, and she had no choice but to follow. They raced through the palace, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. Her injuries protested with every step, sharp pains lancing through her abdomen, but she ignored them. The East Tower was one of the oldest parts of the palace complex, rarely used except for storage. As they climbed the spiral stairs, Celine heard voices above, angry, frightened voices. They emerged into a circular room lit by a single torch, and froze. Kael was there, his back against the wall, silver eyes wide with something Celine had never seen before on his face. Genuine fear. And standing between him and the door was Lyra Ashwin. But not the Lyra everyone knew. This Lyra's eyes were glowing with an unnatural red light, her skin covered in dark veins that pulsed with corrupted magic. In her hand was a knife coated with something that looked like liquid shadow. Behind Celine, Derek gasped. "Gods, she's been possessed." "Not possessed," Lyra said, and her voice was wrong. Deeper, with harmonics that made Celine's ears ring. "Just finally showing my true colors." She smiled at Kael. "Did you really think I stayed loyal all these years because I loved you? Oh, you arrogant, foolish male." Kael's hand was pressed against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, black and viscous. Not normal blood. Poisoned, Celine realized with horror. "Lyra, whatever this is, we can fix it," Kael said hoarsely. "Just put down the knife. There's nothing to fix." Lyra's red eyes swung to Celine. "And look, your pathetic little mate came to watch you die. How touching." The knife in her hand began to glow with that same red light. Celine didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. She lunged forward as Lyra struck, putting herself between the possessed warrior and her alpha king. The knife meant for Kael's heart buried itself in Celine's shoulder instead. Pain exploded through her body, worse than anything she'd felt during the rogue attack. This wasn't just physical pain, it was soul-deep, like the poison on that blade was trying to tear her apart from the inside. She heard Kael scream her name, heard Derek shouting for guards, heard Lyra's laugh, high and inhuman. And as the darkness claimed her for the second time in 2 weeks, Celine's last conscious thought was, "At least this time, I chose who I saved." Celine woke to the smell of pine and wood smoke. Not the sterile herb scent of the palace healing tent, not the cold stone smell of her chambers. This was different, raw and organic, like waking up in the heart of a forest that hadn't seen civilization in centuries. Her eyelids felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. She forced them open anyway, blinking against light that filtered through a ceiling made of rough-hewn logs. Sunlight, she realized. Real sunlight, not the muted glow that came through palace windows. Where the hell was she? Celine tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain screamed through her shoulder where Lyra's poisoned blade had struck. But it was different from before. Sharper, cleaner somehow, like the corruption had been burned out and replaced with honest injury. "Easy," a male voice said from somewhere to her left, deep and rough, with an accent she didn't recognize. Northern, maybe. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your body's still fighting off the venom." Celine turned her head slowly. A man sat in a chair beside the bed, whittling something from a piece of pale wood. He was massive, broader even than Kael, with shoulders that looked like they could carry mountains. His hair was dark copper shot through with silver, pulled back in a warrior's knot. Scars crisscrossed his forearms and one ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, but it was his eyes that caught her. Pale green, like ice over deep water, and completely unreadable. "Who are you?" Celine's voice came out as a rasp. "Ronan Vex." He didn't look up from his whittling. "And before you ask where you are, you're in the Frost Peak Mountains, about 200 miles north of your precious Shadowfang territory." 200 miles. Celine's mind reeled. "How did I carried you." Still didn't look at her. After your beta had the sense to send up a distress flare when he realized you'd been poisoned with nightshade venom. His knife paused mid-stroke. "You're welcome, by the way." Celine stared at him. "You're the healer Marcus contacted?" "Healer is a generous word." Ronan finally looked up, those pale eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her want to look away. "But, yeah. I know how to purge dark blood poison. One of the few left who does, actually." He went back to his carving. "Lucky for you." "Lucky?" Celine almost laughed. She'd been stabbed by a possessed ex-lover while trying to save a mate who didn't want her. Lucky wasn't the word she'd use. "Where's Kael?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Your Alpha King?" Ronan's lip curled slightly. "Safe in his palace, I assume." He set down his knife and wood, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Let me tell you what I know, little Luna. 3 nights ago, your beta sent word that you'd been poisoned, and your pack healers couldn't stop it. Said you had maybe 6 hours before the venom reached your heart." He paused. "Said your mate refused to let anyone take you out of pack territory. Something about not trusting outsiders." Celine felt ice form in her stomach. "So your beta did what any decent male would do. He ignored his alpha's orders and smuggled you out through a supply convoy." Ronan's eyes were hard. "Brought you here because he'd heard rumors that the exiled alpha of Frost Peak knew dark blood poisons. Rumors that were true, as it turns out." He stood, walking to the window. Celine noticed he moved with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "I spent 2 days purging venom from your blood," he continued. 2 days of forcing healing tinctures down your throat, while you screamed and thrashed and bled from wounds that wouldn't close." His voice was matter-of-fact, but something darker moved beneath the surface. "You died twice. I brought you back both times." "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "You don't know me." Ronan turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something flicker in those frozen eyes. Something that might have been old pain. "Because I know what it's like to be thrown away by people who should have protected you," he said quietly. "And I don't let people die when I can save them, even if they might wish I hadn't. The last part hit harder than Celine expected. She looked down at her hands, pale and scarred now with the silvery marks that dark blood venom left behind. Her shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. Her wolf was silent, not gone, but exhausted beyond measure. "What happened after?" she asked. "After Marcus brought me here." Ronan walked back to his chair and sat, picking up his whittling again. "That's an interesting question, because according to the runners who passed through here, there's a lot of confusion about what happened that night in the East Tower." "Meaning?" "Meaning your mate is claiming the attack was a rogue infiltration, that Lyra Ashwin was possessed against her will by dark blood magic and is now being held in isolation for her own safety." He paused, letting that sink in. No mention of conspiracy, no suggestion that she might have been working against the pack intentionally. Just a tragic accident that wounded the Luna and traumatized the Alpha's former lover. Celine closed her eyes. Of course. Kael was protecting Lyra even now. "Your beta doesn't believe it," Ronan continued. "Neither do several of your council members, from what I hear. But the Alpha King isn't allowing anyone to question Lyra or investigate further, says it would be cruel to interrogate a victim of possession." "Convenient," Celine muttered. "Isn't it?" Ronan's knife moved in steady, practiced strokes. "He's also declared you're recovering under heavy guard in a secure location. Told the pack you needed complete isolation to heal. No visitors, no contact. So no one knows I'm here. No one except your beta and the two warriors he trusted enough to help smuggle you out." Ronan glanced at her. "You're officially a state secret, little Luna. Hidden away where you can't ask uncomfortable questions about what really happened that night." The implication settled over Celine like a shroud. Kyle wasn't just protecting Lyra, he was protecting himself. From scrutiny, from scandal, from having to explain why his former lover had tried to murder him and his mate had nearly died saving him. Better to bury it all. Better to keep Celine hidden until she was well enough to play her part again as the obedient Luna who caused no trouble. Something cold and hard crystallized in Celine's chest. "How long?" she asked. Ronan looked up. "How long what? How long until I'm strong enough to travel?" His eyes narrowed. "Depends where you're planning to go. Anywhere but back to Shadowfang." The silence that followed was heavy. Ronan studied her face for a long moment, and Celine had the unsettling feeling he was seeing straight through to her bones. "You understand what you're saying?" he asked finally. "If you run, he'll hunt you. Mate bonds don't let alphas just shrug off their mates disappearing. Let him hunt." Celine met his gaze steadily. "I'm done being a trophy he keeps on a shelf while he builds a life with someone else. Even if running means war, because that's what it'll look like to other packs. A Luna abandoning her mate during a crisis. It'll be seen as weakness, disloyalty. It'll be seen as the truth," Celine said. "That Kael Draven doesn't value his mate enough to protect her. That he'd rather hide her away than deal with the consequences of his own choices." Ronan was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, just a slight curve of his scarred mouth, but it transformed his entire face. Made him look less like a warrior carved from granite and more like someone who understood exactly what she was feeling. "You've got spine," he said. "More than I expected from a Luna who grew up in luxury." "I grew up in a minor pack that barely had enough resources to feed its people," Celine corrected. "I know what it's like to be underestimated, to be seen as lesser because you're not born to power." "Is that why you stayed with him, even when it was clear he didn't want you?" The question was blunt, almost cruel. But Celine found herself answering honestly. "I stayed because I thought love could be earned, that if I was good enough, patient enough, strong enough, he'd eventually see me as something other than an obligation." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can't make someone choose you. You can only accept that they won't." Ronan nodded slowly. "Smart girl. Took me 20 years to learn that lesson." There was a story there. Celine could see it in the shadows behind his eyes, the way his jaw tightened slightly. But before she could ask, the door to the cabin opened and a woman entered. She was older than Celine, maybe 40, with iron gray hair braided down her back, and the build of someone who'd spent her life doing hard physical labor. Her eyes, the same pale green as Ronan's, swept over Celine with clinical assessment. "She's awake," the woman said. "Good. I was starting to think you'd purged too much blood along with the venom." "She'll live," Ronan said. "Whether she'll thank me for it is another question." The woman snorted. No one ever thanks you for anything, brother. She walked to the bed and pulled back the blanket covering Celine's shoulder, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. Healing clean. The scarring will be permanent, but at least you'll keep the arm. Brother? Celine repeated, looking between them. Your siblings? Astrid Vex, the woman said, head healer of what's left of Frost Peak Pack. And yes, I have the misfortune of being related to this brooding mountain of bad decisions. She replaced the blanket. You're Luna Celine Vale of Shadowfang, the one who married the pretty boy Alpha King everyone said was too arrogant for his own good. That's me, Celine said dryly. Astrid's eyes sharpened. The same Luna who challenged that pretty boy in front of his council a week ago. Questioned his military tactics in open session. News travels fast. News about interesting people travels fast. Astrid pulled a chair over and sat. The rest of us are boring. But a Luna who grows a backbone and calls out her alpha. That's entertainment. It wasn't entertainment, Celine said quietly. 30 people died because of bad decisions. Someone had to say it. And now you're exiled in a mountain cabin recovering from assassination by possessed lover. Astrid leaned back. So the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? About what? About the fact that your mate is lying to your entire pack. That the woman who tried to kill you both is being protected instead of prosecuted. That you're being hidden away like a shameful secret. Astrid's voice was level, but her eyes were fierce. You can go back and play the obedient Luna again. Let him control the narrative, tell you what to say, keep you in a box where you can't cause trouble. Or you can do something else. Like what? Celine asked. Like find out the truth, Ronan said from his position by the window. About Lyra. About what really happened that night. About how deep the rotten Shadowfang actually goes. Celine looked between them. Why do you care? This isn't your fight. Brother and sister exchanged a glance. Then Astrid spoke. 12 years ago, our pack was destroyed. Not by rogues or natural disaster or bad luck. She paused. By betrayal from within. By someone we trusted who turned out to be working for enemies we didn't know we had. Her voice went hard. We lost everything. Our territory, our people, our standing among the packs. Ronan and I survived along with maybe 40 others. The rest were slaughtered. Celine felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Astrid leaned forward. Because what you described, the possessed wolf, the dark blood poison, the convenient cover-up, that all sounds familiar. Too familiar. And if what happened to Frost Peak is happening to Shadowfang, you need to know before it's too late to stop it. You think Lyra's working for someone, Celine said slowly. I think Lyra got infected with dark blood magic somehow, and that kind of infection doesn't happen by accident. Ronan turned from the window. Someone had to give it to her. Someone had to teach her how to use it. And someone had to have a reason for wanting both you and your mate dead. But she didn't kill us, Celine pointed out. She had the chance, and she didn't take it. Because maybe dead wasn't the goal. Ronan's eyes were cold. Maybe the goal was chaos. Weakening your pack from the inside. Making you and Kale look incompetent. Destroying trust between mates and between leaders and their people. He crossed his arms. That's how they took down Frost Peak. Not through direct assault, but by turning us against each other until we tore ourselves apart. The implications made Celine's head spin. If Ronan and Astrid were right, if Lyra was part of some larger conspiracy, then Shadowfang was in more danger than anyone realized. And Kale, by hiding the truth, was making it worse. I need to go back, Celine said. I need to warn... You need to heal, Astrid interrupted firmly. And you need proof. Going back now with nothing but theories will accomplish exactly nothing except maybe getting you killed for real this time. Then help me find proof. We can do that, Ronan said, but it'll take time. Weeks, maybe months of digging into Lyra's background, tracking her movements, finding out who she's been in contact with. He looked at Celine seriously. And it'll mean staying dead. Staying dead? Letting your pack think you're still isolated and recovering. No contact, no messages. Nothing that might alert whoever's behind this that you're asking questions. Ronan's expression was grim. It'll mean abandoning your mate bond for a while. Letting Kyle think he's won. Can you do that? Celine thought about it. Thought about the bond that connected her to Kyle. that golden thread that even now pulled at her chest. Thought about 2 years of trying to be enough for someone who would never choose her. Thought about waking up after nearly dying twice, and realizing that Kyle had used both incidents to make himself look better rather than addressing the real problems. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." "Good." Astrid stood. "Then let's start with the basics. What do you know about Lyra Ashwin before she came to Shadowfang?" "Not much," Celine admitted. "She arrived about 5 years ago from the Eastern Territories, rose through the warrior ranks fast, became Kyle's lover around the time his father died, and he became Alpha King. And your mate never questioned how a nobody from a minor Eastern pack became one of his best warriors in less than 2 years?" Ronan's voice was skeptical. Kyle said she was a natural fighter, that she had instincts most warriors spent decades developing, or she had training most warriors never get access to, Astrid said darkly, the kind of training that comes from very specific places, very dangerous places. She moved to a rough wooden table and spread out a map. Celine recognized the geography, the territories of the major packs, marked with different colors and symbols. "There are 3 places in the known territories where someone can learn dark blood magic," Astrid said, pointing to locations on the map. "The Crimson Wastes in the far south, the Shadowmere Swamps in the east, and the Broken Peaks in the northwest. All 3 are controlled by rogue factions that have no loyalty to any legitimate pack." "You think Lyra trained at one of these places?" Celine asked. "I think it's worth finding out." Astrid looked at her. "But that means sending scouts, asking dangerous questions in dangerous places. And it means you staying here hidden and safe while we do the legwork." Celine wanted to argue, wanted to say she could help, could do something other than hide in a mountain cabin while others fought her battles. But she was weak, still recovering. Her wolf was silent and her body ached with every breath. Going back to Shadowfang now would accomplish nothing except confirming Kyle's narrative that she was too fragile to be a proper Luna. So instead she said, "How long?" "Give us a month," Ronan said. 4 weeks to gather intelligence and build a real case. Then we'll figure out next steps." A month. 4 weeks of being presumed dead, or might as well be dead to everyone she knew. 4 weeks of letting Kyle think he'd successfully buried the truth. It felt wrong, cowardly, like running away instead of facing the problem head on. But Celine was learning that sometimes survival meant choosing the smart play over the brave one. And right now, the smart play was patience. "All right," she said, 1 month. Astrid smiled. "Smart girl. Now let's get some food in you. You're thin as a rail and you won't heal properly if you don't eat." As the siblings moved around the cabin preparing a meal, Celine closed her eyes and reached tentatively for the bond connecting her to Kyle. It was still there, thinner than before but present. She could feel him on the other end, distant and distracted, his emotions muted like he'd deliberately closed himself off from her. "Probably with Lyra," a bitter voice whispered in her head. Celine let the bond go slack, stopped trying to reach for him. If Kyle wanted to shut her out, fine. She'd use this time to become someone who didn't need him anymore, someone strong enough to stand alone. Tickets. The days bled together in a rhythm of recovery and revelation. Celine's body healed slowly under Astrid's expert care. The wound in her shoulder closed, leaving behind angry red scarring that would eventually fade to silver. Her wolf stirred, weak but present, offering small bursts of healing that accelerated the process. But it was the revelations about Lyra that truly consumed her attention. Ronan had connections, remnants of packs that had been destroyed or scattered, warriors turned mercenaries who owed him favors, informants who traded in secrets. He sent messages through channels Celine didn't understand and received responses in coded language that Astrid translated with grim efficiency. What they found was damning. Lyra Ashwin wasn't her real name. She'd been born Lyra Blackthorn in the Shadowmere Swamps, daughter of a rogue alpha who'd been executed for practicing dark blood magic 20 years ago. She'd disappeared into the underground after her father's death, and for a decade there was no record of her anywhere. Then she'd resurfaced 5 years ago with a new name, a fabricated background, and fighting skills that suggested extensive training in styles most legitimate packs didn't teach. She infiltrated Shadowfang specifically, Ronan said one evening as they reviewed the latest intelligence. It wasn't random. She targeted your mate deliberately. But why? Celine asked. What's the endgame? That's what we don't know yet. Astrid frowned at the papers spread across the table. But I'll tell you what we do know. 3 other packs have had similar situations in the last decade. A charismatic outsider joins the pack, rises to a position of power or influence, and then things start going wrong. Accidents, betrayals, internal conflicts that weaken the pack from within. And in each case, Ronan added, there was dark blood magic involved. Sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, but always present. What happened to those packs? Celine's voice was quiet. 2 collapsed entirely. 1 survived, but is now a shadow of what it was. Ronan met her eyes. Frostpeak was the second one. We didn't see it coming until it was too late. Celine felt cold. So Shadowfang is under attack, has been for years, and Kale has no idea. Or he does, and he's choosing not to see it, Astrid said bluntly. Because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that he let his feelings for a woman cloud his judgment, that he kept a potential traitor close because he was too proud to admit he'd been played. That sounded exactly like Kyle. We need concrete proof, Celine said, something undeniable. Because if I go back with nothing but theories and accusations, Kyle will dismiss it as jealousy or vindictiveness. We're working on it, Ronan assured her. But these things take time. Dark blood practitioners are careful. They cover their tracks well. Then we dig deeper. Over the following weeks, Celine threw herself into the investigation with an intensity that surprised even her. She pored over maps and reports, learning about dark blood magic and its symptoms, studying the patterns of previous infiltrations. And she trained. Ronan watched her attempt to do basic conditioning exercises one morning and shook his head. You fight like someone who's afraid of getting hurt. I'm not a warrior, Celine said defensively. No, but you're a Luna who nearly got killed twice because you couldn't defend yourself. He walked over and adjusted her stance. Your mate failed to protect you. Your pack healers couldn't save you. At some point, little Luna, you need to learn to protect yourself. So Celine learned. She learned how to throw a proper punch without breaking her thumb. Learned how to use her smaller size as an advantage rather than a liability. Learned that surviving wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being smart enough to exploit weaknesses and stubborn enough to keep getting back up. Ronan was a brutal teacher. He didn't coddle or offer false praise. When she messed up, he told her bluntly. When she improved, he just pushed her harder. But slowly, Celine felt something shift inside her. The fragile, uncertain Luna, who'd waited desperately for her mate's approval, was being replaced by someone harder. Someone who understood that strength came in many forms, and that the greatest weakness wasn't physical fragility. It was depending on others to determine your worth. You're different, Astrid observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Not just physically. Something in your eyes has changed. Celine thought about it. I'm angry. Good. Anger is useful if you channel it right. I spent 2 years trying to be perfect for someone who never wanted me in the first place. 2 years making myself smaller so he'd be comfortable. She stared into the flames, and it almost got me killed. So yes, I'm angry. At him, at Lyra, at myself for being naive enough to think I could earn love through service. Love isn't earned, Astrid said quietly. It's given freely or it's not really love at all. What you had was a transaction. You provided support and loyalty. He provided status and protection. But that's not a partnership. That's employment. The words hit hard because they were true. What did you do? Celine asked. When you realized someone had betrayed Frostpeak? I survived, Astrid said simply. I grabbed who I could and I ran. And then I spent a decade learning everything I could about dark blood magic and the creatures who use it so I'd never be caught off guard again. She looked at Celine. Sometimes survival is the best revenge, living when they expected you to die, becoming strong when they thought you were broken. Is that what you're doing here, surviving? I'm building something better than what I lost. Astrid's voice was firm. A community of survivors who look out for each other, who don't wait for some alpha to save them. We're small, but we're loyal, and that counts for more than I expected. Over the next 2 weeks, Celine met the others who lived in Ronan's territory. There were about 40 of them, scattered across the mountains in small settlements. Most were refugees from destroyed packs. Some were exiles. A few were rogues who'd chosen to leave pack life behind. But all of them had one thing in common. They'd been failed by the traditional pack system and decided to build something different. They looked at Celine with curiosity rather than deference. No one called her Luna. No one bowed or treated her like she was fragile. They judged her by her actions, not her title. It was disorienting and liberating in equal measure. One afternoon, a scout arrived with urgent news. Ronan called Celine and Astrid to his cabin immediately. "We found something," the scout, a grizzled male named Garrett, said without preamble. "One of my contacts in the Southern Territories saw Lyra Ashwin 3 months ago, before the rogue attacks, before the possession incident." "Where?" Celine demanded. "Shadowmere Swamps, meeting with a rogue alpha named Darius Blackthorn." Garrett paused. "Her brother." The room went silent. "We thought all of her family died when her father was executed," Astrid said slowly. "Apparently not." Garrett spread out a rough sketch on the table. "According to my contact, Darius has been building a coalition of rogue packs for years, preparing for something big, and Lyra has been his eyes and ears inside Shadowfang." "So it's confirmed," Ronan said grimly. "She's a plant, an infiltrator." "But what's the goal?" Celine asked. "If they want to destroy Shadowfang, why not just attack directly? Why this slow sabotage?" "Because direct attacks can be defended against," Astrid said. "But if you weaken a pack from within first, turn the Alpha against his Luna, make the people lose faith in their leaders, create chaos and confusion, then when you do attack, they'll crumble." "When?" Celine repeated. "You think an attack is coming?" "I think you stopped it temporarily by exposing Lyra," Ronan said. "But her brother won't give up. He'll regroup and try again, probably with a different approach." He looked at Celine seriously. "Which means you need to go back." Celine's heart lurched. "Back to Shadowfang? Back to warn your pack. Back to expose Lyra and her brother before they can execute whatever they're planning." Ronan's voice was firm. "You have the proof now. You have the connection to the swamps, the brother's name, witnesses who saw them together. That's enough to force an investigation even Kyle can't dismiss." "He'll be furious," Celine said quietly, "that I've been gone this long, that I didn't contact him. Let him be furious." Astrid's eyes were hard. "You nearly died saving his ungrateful hide. You don't owe him comfort or explanations. You owe him the truth, and you owe your pack protection. Everything else is secondary." Celine took a shaky breath. "All right. When do I leave?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Ronan said. "I'll escort you to the border. After that, you're on your own." That night, Celine stood outside the cabin and looked up at the stars. The mate bond in her chest pulled tighter now that she was considering returning. She could feel Kyle on the other end, restless and agitated, probably wondering where his supposedly recovering mate really was. Let him wonder. Let him stew in uncertainty the way she'd stewed for 2 years, wondering if she'd ever be enough. "You're ready," a voice said behind her. Ronan had emerged from the cabin, moving silently despite his size. "Am I?" Celine asked. "I'm going back to face a mate who lied to protect his lover, to expose a conspiracy that might tear my pack apart. I don't feel ready. Ready isn't a feeling, it's a decision." Ronan came to stand beside her. "You decide you're capable of doing what needs to be done, and then you do it regardless of how you feel. Is that how you've survived, making decisions without feeling?" "No, I feel plenty. Anger, grief, regret." His voice was low. "But I don't let those feelings paralyze me. I use them, channel them into action." He glanced at her. "You've learned to do that too these past weeks. Don't lose it now." Celine nodded slowly. "Thank you. For saving me, for training me, for giving me time to become someone who might actually survive what comes next. Thank yourself. I just provided the space. You did the work." Ronan's scarred face was serious in the starlight. "And remember, survival isn't the same as winning. Sometimes you survive and still lose everything you thought you wanted. The question is whether you can build something new from the ashes." "What did you build?" Celine asked. "This." He gestured at the mountains around them. "A place where broken things can heal without being forced back into shapes that don't fit anymore. It's not what I had before. But it's mine. And it's real. And it doesn't require me to pretend I'm something I'm not." That sounded like the closest thing to peace Celine had heard in months. She thought about Shadowfang, the palace that had never felt like home, the mate who'd never chosen her, the role that had always felt like an ill-fitting costume. Thought about who she'd been before and who she was becoming. Maybe going back didn't mean returning to the old life. Maybe it meant closing a chapter so a new one could begin. Dawn came cold and clear. Celine dressed in the practical traveling clothes Astrid had given her. Leather pants, sturdy boots, a thick cloak that would keep the mountain wind at bay. She strapped a knife to her belt, a weapon she now knew how to use. The woman who looked back at her from the small mirror was almost unrecognizable. Harder, scarred, eyes that had seen betrayal and survived it. The 40 members of Ronan's community gathered to see her off. They didn't make speeches or offer flowery goodbyes, just nodded respectfully, a few clasping her shoulder as she passed. Astrid pulled her aside before she left. "If things go badly," she said quietly, "you always have a place here." No questions asked. Celine embraced her quickly. "Thank you doesn't cover it." "Then don't thank me. Just survive. And if you get a chance to punch that pretty boy Alpha in the face, take it." Astrid's smile was fierce. Some males need a good punch to clear their heads. Ronan was waiting with 2 horses saddled and ready. The journey to the Shadowfang border would take most of the day on horseback. They rode in comfortable silence for the first hour, navigating mountain trails that would have terrified Celine a month ago, but now felt manageable. Around midday, Ronan spoke. "There's something you should know before you go back." Celine glanced at him. "What?" "Your mate has been searching for you. Not officially. He's maintaining the story that you're in isolation recovering, but he's sent private scouts out, hired trackers. He's looking, for me specifically, or just to make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be?" "Does it matter?" Ronan's eyes were unreadable. "Either way, he'll know the moment you cross the border. The mate bond will tell him you're close." "Good." Celine's jaw set. "Let him know. Let him come running. It's time we had a real conversation. Just remember, confrontation isn't the same as resolution. You can expose Lyra's betrayal and still end up right back where you started if you let him charm his way out of accountability." "I won't," Celine said firmly. They rode on. By late afternoon, they reached the ridge overlooking Shadowfang territory. Celine could see the palace in the distance, its towers gleaming in the slanting sunlight. From here, it looked almost peaceful. Beautiful even. But she knew better now. Knew that beauty could hide rot. That gleaming facades often concealed crumbling foundations. "This is where I leave you," Ronan said, reining in his horse. "The border is another mile south. Cross it and your mate will feel you immediately." Celine dismounted and turned to face him. "I can't repay what you've done for me." "Don't try. Just make it count." He looked at her seriously. "And if you ever need allies, real allies, not the fair-weather kind who'll abandon you the moment things get ugly, you know where to find us." She nodded, throat tight with emotion she didn't dare show. Ronan reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Inside this is a vial of antidote for dark blood poison, just in case. And a message for your beta. Give it to him privately. No one else." Celine took the pouch. "Thank you. Stop thanking me and go. The longer you wait, the harder it gets." He turned his horse back toward the mountains. "Oh, and little Luna? When you face him, don't apologize for surviving. Make him apologize for forcing you to." Then he was gone, riding back into the wilderness that had become her sanctuary. Celine turned toward Shadowfang territory, squaring her shoulders. The moment she crossed the border, the mate bond slammed back to life with crushing intensity. She felt Kael's shock ripple through the connection, followed by a surge of emotions too tangled to parse: relief, anger, confusion, and something that might have been fear. She kept walking. By the time she reached the main road leading to the palace, a group of riders was thundering toward her. Celine recognized Marcus at the head of the group, his face a mixture of disbelief and fierce joy. He pulled his horse up short and practically fell out of the saddle in his haste to reach her. "Luna," he breathed. "Gods, you're alive. You're actually alive. Did you doubt it?" He laughed, a broken sound. "When you disappeared, when Ronan sent word you'd survived the purge but couldn't come home yet, I didn't know if I'd ever see you again." He gripped her shoulders. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than all right." Celine met his eyes. "I know what Lyra is, Marcus. I know what she's planning, and I have proof." The beta's expression turned fierce. "Then let's go make some people very uncomfortable." The ride to the palace was surreal. Warriors they passed stared openly, shock and confusion written across their faces. The Luna who'd been supposedly isolated and recovering had just appeared out of nowhere, looking harder and stronger than she'd ever been. Let them stare. Let them wonder. The palace gates opened, and Celine rode through with her head high. And there, at the top of the entrance steps, stood Kyle Draven. His silver eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch despite everything. Even now, even after all the betrayal and pain, part of her responded to his presence, the mate bond singing with recognition. But that part was smaller now, quieter. Celine dismounted and walked up the steps slowly, deliberately. She stopped 3 feet from him, close enough to talk, far enough to maintain distance. "Hello, Kyle. Where have you been?" His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the strain underneath. "I've had scouts searching for weeks. You were supposed to be in isolation." "I was recovering," Celine interrupted, "from being poisoned by your lover while saving your life. Remember that?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair, isn't it?" She tilted her head. "Tell me, did you visit Lyra while I was gone? Check on her? Make sure she was comfortable in her isolation?" The way his eyes shifted told her everything. "You did," she said flatly. "Of course you did. She's being held under guard. She tried to murder us both." Celine's voice rose. "And you're treating her like a victim instead of a traitor. You're protecting her even now." "I'm protecting the pack from panic," Kyle snapped. "If people knew the full extent of what happened, the chaos, the pack deserves the truth." Celine pulled the documents from her cloak and thrust them at him. "And here it is. Lyra Blackthorn, not Ashwin, daughter of an executed rogue alpha, trained in dark blood magic in the Shadowmere swamps, working with her brother to infiltrate and destroy Shadowfang from within." Kale stared at the papers like they might bite him. "I have witnesses," Celine continued. "Proof of her real identity. Evidence of meetings between her and known rogue leaders. Everything you need to understand that she's been playing you from the start." "This is impossible," Kale said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "It's the truth. And you would have known it weeks ago if you'd bothered to investigate instead of covering it up to protect your pride." She stepped closer. "You chose her over me at every turn, Kyle, and now I'm choosing myself. I'm done being the expendable mate you keep in the shadows." She shoved the papers into his chest and turned to address the crowd that had gathered in the courtyard below. Her voice rang out clear and strong. "People of Shadowfang, your Luna has returned with information critical to the pack's survival. There is a traitor in your midst, a she who has worked for years to weaken us from within, and your Alpha King has been protecting her because he was too blinded by old feelings to see the truth." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Behind her, Kyle made a choked sound. "Celine, what are you doing?" "What you should have done from the beginning," she said without looking back. "Telling the truth." She descended the steps, walking through the parting crowd toward the council chambers. And as she went, she felt the mate bond straining, stretching, pulled taut by the weight of everything unsaid and undone between them. But for the first time in 2 years, Celine didn't care if it snapped. Some bonds were meant to break so stronger ones could form. And she was done holding together something that had been fractured from the start. Behind her, Kyle called her name one more time. Celine didn't turn around, she just kept walking. The council chamber felt smaller than Celine remembered. She stood at the center of the circular room, 12 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of shock, suspicion, and cautious respect. The documents Ronan had given her were spread across the ancient oak table like accusations given form, witness statements, coded messages, sketches of Lyra meeting with her brother in the swamps. Evidence that should have been damning, should have been enough. But Celine had learned that truth was only as powerful as the people willing to believe it. Kyle stood at his elevated seat, his knuckles white against the armrest. He hadn't spoken since she'd laid out the case against Lyra 10 minutes ago. Just listened with that shuttered expression he wore when his world was crumbling and he refused to let anyone see. The eldest counselor, a gray-haired male named Aldrich, cleared his throat. "Luna Vale, these are serious allegations. If true, they suggest a conspiracy that goes back years." "They are true," Celine said flatly. "I spent 4 weeks in the Northern Territories gathering this information. Every witness is credible. Every document has been verified." "Verified by whom?" another counselor asked. "An exiled alpha who has no love for legitimate packs?" "Verified by people who survived what Shadowfang is currently experiencing," Celine shot back. People who watched their own packs destroyed by the same tactics, the same magic, the same slow rot from within. She turned to face Kael directly. You know I'm right. You felt it that night in the tower when Lyra's eyes went red and the poison on her blade burned black. That wasn't possession, Kael. That was training. Years of it. His jaw worked. Even if what you're saying is true, even if Lyra has been compromised somehow, we can't just execute her without trial, without due process. I'm not asking you to execute her, Celine said through gritted teeth. I'm asking you to investigate, to question her, to stop protecting someone who tried to kill both of us. I'm protecting the stability of this pack. Kael's voice rose slightly. If we start witch hunts based on evidence gathered by outsiders who saved my life after you left me to die, Celine interrupted coldly. Twice. The chamber went silent. Vera, the younger counselor who'd supported Celine before, leaned forward. Alpha King, with respect, the Luna has grounds for her concerns. Perhaps a formal inquiry? We'll table this discussion, Kael said abruptly. Until I've had time to review the evidence properly. He looked at Celine. You've been through a traumatic experience. You're clearly not thinking rationally. Something snapped inside Celine's chest. Not thinking rationally? Her voice came out low and dangerous. I spent a month recovering from poison meant to kill me. Spent weeks learning to fight because I realized no one, not you, not the pack, not anyone, was going to protect me if I couldn't protect myself. I tracked down witnesses and gathered proof while you were here lying to our people about where I was. And now you're dismissing me as hysterical? I didn't say hysterical. Toolkit. You implied it. She stepped closer to his elevated seat, craning her neck to look up at him. And you know what? I'm done caring what you think of me. I'm done waiting for you to choose me, to see me, to give a damn whether I live or die. This isn't about us anymore, Kael. This is about a pack that's being destroyed from within while its alpha buries his head in the sand. Because facing the truth means admitting he was wrong. Kael's face had gone pale. His silver eyes blazed with something that might have been fury or might have been desperation. Celine couldn't tell anymore and realized with bitter clarity that she didn't care. This session is over, Kael announced. Everyone out. Now. The counselors exchanged uncertain glances but slowly filed out. Vera caught Celine's eye as she passed, her expression sympathetic but wary. Marcus was the last to leave, pausing at the door. Luna, he said quietly. I'll be fine, Celine told him. After the door closed, silence pressed down like a physical weight. Kael descended from his seat slowly, each step measured. When he reached the main floor, he stood facing her across 6 feet of empty space that felt like a chasm. You humiliated me, he said quietly. In front of the entire pack. You humiliated yourself, Celine countered. I just told the truth you've been hiding. The truth according to an exiled alpha with his own agenda. The truth according to evidence you're too afraid to examine because it means facing what you've done. She crossed her arms. Tell me something, Kael. When did you realize Lyra still had her claws in you? Was it before or after you left me bleeding in the mud to ride to her rescue? His flinch was almost imperceptible. That's not fair. Nothing about this has ever been fair. Celine's voice cracked slightly. I was your mate, chosen by fate, by the bond that's supposed to be sacred, and you treated me like an inconvenience, a political arrangement you tolerated while keeping your real affections for someone who was literally sent to destroy you. You did. Every time you invited her to private dinners, every time you took her advice over mine, every time you looked at her the way you never looked at me. She felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. I was dying and you chose her. That's the truth you can't escape, no matter how much you try to reframe it. Kael's hands clenched at his sides. I made a tactical error. I've admitted that. It wasn't tactical. It was emotional. And that's what terrifies you, isn't it? That you let your feelings compromise everything you claim to stand for. Before Kael could respond, the chamber door burst open. Marcus stood there, his face ashen. Alpha King. Luna. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Kael demanded. Lyra's escaped. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. What do you mean escaped? Celine asked sharply. She was under guard. She was, Marcus said grimly. Past tense. The The guards are dead, throats torn out, and there's a message carved into the cell wall. Show us. They ran through the palace corridors, Celine's heart pounding against her ribs. The holding cells were in the lower levels, stone rooms designed to contain even the strongest wolves. As they descended, the smell hit first, copper and death, and something acrid that made Celine's nose burn. The scene inside the cell block was carnage. 4 guards lay in spreading pools of blood, their eyes still open in shock. The cell door hung off its hinges, twisted metal suggesting inhuman strength, and on the back wall, carved deep into stone, were words that made Celine's blood freeze. The reckoning comes at the blood moon. 3 nights from now. Kael stared at the message, his face unreadable. Get search parties out. I want every inch of this territory covered. She can't have gone far. Alpha, one of the surviving guards said from the doorway. His voice shook. She didn't go anywhere. She's still here. What? She walked out of the cell block and headed toward the east wing, toward the royal quarters. The guard swallowed hard. She was laughing. The east wing, where Kael's private chambers were located, where Celine's chambers were located. They ran. The hallways were eerily silent, too silent. Celine's wolf, dormant for weeks, suddenly surged to alertness inside her chest. Danger, it whispered. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Kael reached his chamber doors first and froze. They were open, hanging crooked like someone had walked through without bothering to close them. Inside, Celine could see furniture overturned, papers scattered, deep claw marks gouged into the walls. In the center of the destruction sat Lyra. She looked different from the last time Celine had seen her. Thinner, almost skeletal, with those red veins visible beneath pale skin. Her amber eyes had gone completely crimson, glowing faintly in the dim light. But she was smiling, a wide, unnatural smile that showed too many teeth. Hello, darling, Lyra said, her voice layered with harmonics that made Celine's ears ring. Miss me? Kael took a step forward. Lyra, listen to me carefully. Oh, I'm done listening to you. Lyra stood gracefully, brushing dust from her torn clothes. I spent 5 years listening to you, pretending to care about your pathetic pack politics, pretending your touch didn't make my skin crawl. She tilted her head. Did you know I used to vomit after every time we were together? The taste of you was that revolting. Kael flinched like he'd been struck. It was all a lie, Lyra continued, walking slowly around the destroyed room. Every smile, every soft word, every moment you thought we shared. I was acting, and you were the audience, too desperate for validation to notice how badly I performed. She laughed, high and cruel. You were so easy, Kael, so pathetically easy. Why? The word came out strangled. If you hated me so much, why stay? Because breaking you from the inside was so much more satisfying than a quick death. Lyra's crimson eyes gleamed. My brother wanted to attack directly. Storm the borders, tear down the walls, massacre your people in one glorious night of blood. But I convinced him there was a better way. She moved closer to Kael, and Celine saw him tense, saw his hand drift toward the blade at his belt. Destroy the Alpha's confidence, I said. Make him question every decision. Turn his mate against him. Make his people lose faith. And when he's at his weakest, when the pack is fracturing from within, then we strike. Lyra smiled wider. And here we are. Your Luna returned from the dead hating you, your council doubting your judgment, your warriors whispering about your failures. You're already broken, darling. I just need to finish the job. She moved faster than should have been possible. One moment she was 10 feet away. The next she had Kael by the throat, lifting him off his feet with one hand. Her fingers ended in black claws that dug into his skin, drawing blood. Celine didn't think, just reacted. She lunged forward and drove the knife Ronan had given her into Lyra's back. The possessed woman shrieked and dropped Kael, spinning to face Celine with fury, twisting her features into something inhuman. You, she hissed. You were supposed to die, supposed to break and give up and disappear into obscurity. But instead you came back stronger. Celine pulled the knife free, dark blood coating the blade. Sorry to disappoint. Lyra laughed again, that horrible layered sound. Oh, little Luna, you think one knife wound will stop me? She reached back and touched the injury, bringing her fingers to her mouth to taste the blood. I've survived worse. Much worse. Behind Celine, Kyle was climbing to his feet, gasping for air. His neck bore deep scratches that healed slowly, too slowly. Poison, Celine realized. The claws were poisoned. You're learning, Lyra purred. Another few minutes and the Alpha King will be too weak to fight. Another hour and the poison will reach his heart. She circled them like a predator. And without your mate bond to sustain him, without your precious Luna magic to heal him, he'll die screaming. Then it's a good thing I have this. Celine pulled the vial of antidote from her pocket, the one Ronan had given her specifically for dark blood poison. Lyra's eyes widened. Where did you get that? From people who know what real loyalty looks like. Celine threw the vial to Kyle. Drink it, now. But Lyra was already moving impossibly fast, her clawed hand reaching for the vial. Marcus burst through the doorway with a dozen warriors at his back. They poured into the room, weapons drawn, surrounding Lyra in a loose circle. The possessed woman stopped mid-lunge, assessing the new situation. Her crimson eyes darted from warrior to warrior, calculating odds. Then she smiled. You think numbers matter? Her voice dropped to something that sounded like multiple voices speaking in unison. You think your little pack of house pets can stop what's coming? She threw her head back and howled. It wasn't a wolf's howl. It was something older, darker, a sound that made every warrior in the room stagger. Celine felt her wolf cower inside her chest, whimpering in primal fear. And in the distance, answering howls rose from the darkness beyond the palace walls. Dozens of them. The rogue attack, Marcus breathed. It's starting. No, Lyra said, still smiling that terrible smile. It's ending. This is the night Shadowfang falls. The night the great Alpha King loses everything he's built. She looked directly at Kyle. I told you I'd break you. Did you think I was exaggerating? Kyle had drunk the antidote. Celine could see the color returning to his face, the scratches on his neck beginning to heal properly. But his silver eyes were haunted, staring at Lyra with something that looked like grief mixed with rage. Why? He asked again. Whatever I did to you, whatever slight you perceived— You did nothing, Lyra interrupted. That's the point. You're just in the way. Your pack sits on territory my family has claimed for generations, territory stolen by your grandfather through treaties we never agreed to. She spat blood onto the floor. This isn't personal, Kyle. It's justice. Justice involves slaughter? Celine demanded. Justice involves taking back what's ours. Lyra's gaze shifted to her. And removing obstacles, like naive little Lunas who think love and loyalty matter in a world built on blood and conquest. More howls rose in the night, closer now. Through the shattered window, Celine could see fires starting in the lower city, could hear screams beginning to echo through the streets. Marcus was already issuing orders, sending warriors to defensive positions. But Celine could see the fear in his eyes, could see the calculation running behind his expression. They weren't ready for a full-scale assault, not tonight. Lyra backed toward the window, still smiling. My brother sends his regards, she said to Kyle. He says to thank you for making this so easy. Then she jumped, 3 stories straight down, landing in the courtyard below with inhuman grace. She looked up at them one last time, crimson eyes glowing in the darkness. See you on the battlefield, little Luna. Try not to die too quickly. She vanished into the chaos of the burning city. Celine stood frozen for a heartbeat, processing everything that had just happened. The escape, the revelation, the attack that was already underway. Then Kyle grabbed her arm. We need to get you to safety. No! Celine yanked her arm free. I'm not hiding while the pack burns. You're still recovering. I'm fine. And I'm the Luna of this pack. I don't get to hide. She looked at Marcus. What's our status? Bad, the beta said bluntly. We've got maybe 300 warriors ready to fight. The rogues number at least twice that from initial reports. And they're using dark blood magic. Our wolves can barely get close without being overwhelmed by the corrupted energy. Then we need to even the odds. Celine turned to Kyle. The northern clans. Ronan's people. They know how to fight dark blood practitioners. If we can get word to them. They're days away, Kyle said. We don't have days. We might have hours if we can hold the borders. Celine grabbed a piece of parchment from the destroyed desk and scrawled a quick message. Marcus, send your fastest rider north with this. Tell them Luna Celine requests aid under the old Alliance laws. What old Alliance laws? Kael demanded. Frostpeak was Ealed. They have no obligation. They have honor, Celine snapped, which is more than I can say for some people. She shoved the message at Marcus. Go, now. As Marcus ran from the room, Celine turned back to Kael. His face was a mixture of shock and something that might have been respect. When did you become this? He asked quietly. When I stopped waiting for you to save me. She moved to the window, looking out at the burning city. Now, are you going to help me defend this pack, or are you going to keep questioning my decisions? For the first time in 2 years, Kael looked at her like he was actually seeing her. Tell me what you need, he said. Over the next hour, the palace transformed into a war command center. Warriors rushed through corridors carrying weapons and supplies. Healers set up triage stations in the Great Hall. Civilians were evacuated to the inner keep where the walls were thickest. Celine found herself at the center of it all, making decisions with a certainty that surprised even her. Deploy the archers to the eastern ramparts. Evacuate the lower districts first. Get the elderly and children into the tunnels beneath the palace. Orders she had no business knowing how to give, but somehow she did. Ronin's training, she realized. He taught her more than just how to fight. He taught her how to think tactically, how to see patterns and exploit weaknesses, how to make hard choices without flinching. She was standing over a map of the city, marking defensive positions, when Kael approached. The rogues are concentrating their forces on the northern gate, he said. If it falls, they'll flood into the city center. Then we reinforce it. Pull warriors from the southern positions. That leaves the south vulnerable. The south has natural barriers, rivers, and cliffs. It'll take them hours to navigate that terrain. We need to hold the north. Celine looked up at him. Trust me. Their eyes met and something passed between them. Not the warmth of a mate bond, but something colder and more practical. Mutual respect born from crisis. All right, Kael said finally. I'll lead the defense at the northern gate. No. Celine straightened. I will. Absolutely not. You're the Alpha King. If you fall, the pack loses its leader and its morale. I'm expendable. She saw him start to protest and cut him off. Don't lie to either of us by pretending otherwise. We both know I'm the backup plan at best. Kael's face twisted with something that looked like pain. Celine, I need you here coordinating the overall defense. I'll hold the north. She met his eyes steadily. Let me do this. Let me prove I'm more than the weak Luna you thought I was. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then he nodded. Be careful. Careful died a month ago when your lover stabbed me with a poisoned blade, Celine said. Now I'm just angry. She turned and walked toward the northern gate. The battle was already underway when she arrived. The massive gate, 20 feet of reinforced oak and iron, shuddered under repeated impacts from the rogue forces outside. Warriors lined the ramparts above, firing arrows into the darkness. Below, a defensive line of Shadowfang's best fighters held formation, ready for when the gate inevitably fell. Celine found herself standing beside warriors who'd watched her nearly die a month ago, who'd seen her return from the north changed and hardened. They looked at her with something new in their eyes. Not pity or condescension. Recognition. Luna, the warrior to her left said, a female named Sarah with 3 claw scars across her face. Orders? We hold this gate until reinforcements arrive or we're all dead. Celine drew the blade Ronin had given her. No retreating, no surrender. We make them pay for every inch. Sarah grinned fiercely. Understood. The gate exploded inward. Rogues poured through the breach like a flood, their eyes glowing red with dark blood corruption. They moved wrong, too fast, too fluid, more like shadows than wolves. The two forces collided in a crash of bodies and blades and snapping teeth. Celine fought like Ronin had taught her, dirty and efficient, using her smaller size to slip under guards and strike at vulnerable spots. She wasn't graceful, wasn't elegant, but she was effective. A rogue lunged at her and she sidestepped, driving her blade into his ribs. He went down screaming and she moved to the next target without pausing. Around her, Shadowfang warriors fought with desperation. They were outnumbered, but defending their home gave them an edge. Every street and alley was familiar territory, every building a potential defensive position. But the dark blood magic was devastating. Celine watched warriors falter when they got too close to the corrupted rogues, their wolves cowering from the unnatural energy. Watched as the enemy seemed to move through shadows, appearing behind defensive lines in places they shouldn't have been able to reach. "We can't hold," Sarah panted beside her. "There's too many." "Then we fall back to the secondary position," Celine ordered. "Controlled retreat. Keep formation." They gave ground slowly, fighting for every foot. Celine's arms burned with exhaustion. Her shoulder, still healing from the original wound, screamed in protest. But she kept moving, kept fighting, because stopping meant dying, and she'd already decided she wasn't dying tonight. A massive rogue broke through the line and charged straight at her. Celine barely got her blade up in time to deflect his claws. The impact sent her sprawling backward into the mud. The rogue loomed over her, jaws opening to tear her throat out. A silver wolf crashed into him from the side. Kael, in his wolf form, larger and more deadly than any rogue, tore into the attacker with savage efficiency. Blood sprayed, bones crunched. In seconds, the rogue was dead. Kael shifted back to human form, naked and covered in blood, and hauled Celine to her feet. "I told you to be careful." "I'm still alive. That counts as careful." She glanced past him, and her blood went cold. "Kael, behind you." He spun just as Lyra emerged from the shadows. She looked worse than before, more corrupted. The red veins had spread to cover most of her visible skin, and her eyes glowed so brightly they cast crimson light across the street. In her hands were twin daggers coated with that black poison. "Round 2, she said cheerfully. "Let's see if the Alpha King can protect his mate this time." She attacked with inhuman speed. Kael barely blocked the first strike. The second opened a gash across his chest. The third would have taken his head if Celine hadn't thrown her blade, forcing Lyra to dodge. The corrupted woman hissed in frustration. "You're becoming annoying, little Luna." "Good," Celine spat. They fought as a unit now, Kael and Celine moving in sync for the first time in their relationship. Where he created openings, she exploited them. Where she drew Lyra's attention, he struck from behind. Not because of love or the mate bond, but because survival demanded cooperation. But Lyra was too strong, too fast, enhanced beyond what any natural wolf should be capable of. And she was enjoying this, smiling through the combat like it was a game. "Is this what you wanted, Kael?" she called out between strikes. "A mate who actually fights beside you? How tragic that you only got her after I broke you both." "Shut up," Kael growled. "The truth hurts, doesn't it? That everything you've built is crumbling, that everyone you trusted betrayed you, that the only person who never gave up on you is the one you threw away." Lyra's laugh was manic. "You don't deserve her, darling. You never did." She lunged at Kael with both daggers aimed at his heart. Celine moved without thinking. For the second time, she threw herself between Lyra and her mate, felt the blade pierce her chest, the burning agony of poison flooding her system. But this time was different. This time, she grabbed Lyra's wrist and held on, refused to let go even as the poison scorched through her veins, used the last of her strength to pull the corrupted woman close. "Kael," she gasped. "Now!" Kael's claws tore through Lyra's back and erupted from her chest. The corrupted woman's eyes went wide. She looked down at the claws, then at Celine, then back at Kael. "Impossible," she whispered. "You're not strong enough." "I'm done being weak," Kael said coldly. "For her." He ripped his claws free and Lyra collapsed. Celine fell too, the poison already spreading. She could feel it eating through her worse than the first time. Stronger, more concentrated. Through blurring vision, she saw Kael drop to his knees beside her, saw his mouth moving, forming words she couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears, felt his hands on her face, felt wetness that might have been blood or tears, or both. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Kael's silver eyes, wide with an emotion she'd never seen there before. Terror. Raw, absolute terror at the thought of losing her. And Celine's final conscious thought was bitter and ironic. All it took was almost dying 3 times for him to finally care. Then nothing. Cheat. Celine woke to agony. Every nerve ending in her body felt like it was being flayed with heated knives. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Tried to move, but her muscles wouldn't respond. She was trapped in her own body, feeling everything, able to do nothing. Voices swirled around her in fragments. Dark blood poison. Concentrated dose. Don't know if she'll... Losing her... One voice stood out from the others. Male. Desperate. Kael.
Don't you dare leave me, he was saying. Do you hear me, Celine? Don't you dare die after making me see what I threw away. That's not fair. That's not... His voice broke. Please. Footsteps. Then a familiar voice that made relief spike through her despite the pain. Ronan! Move! The Northern Alpha ordered. Now! Celine felt new hands on her. Felt something bitter forced down her throat. The pain intensified until she thought her body would simply tear apart from the inside.
Then gradually, it began to recede. She could breathe again. Could feel her heart beating steadily instead of the irregular flutter that meant organ failure. Could sense her wolf stirring weakly, adding its own healing to whatever Ronan was doing. When she finally forced her eyes open, the first thing she saw was Ronan's scarred face hovering over her. You have got to stop making a habit of this, he said dryly. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper. Palace Healing Room. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Ronan sat back, looking exhausted. Your mate sent a rider to me the moment you went down. I've been purging poison from your system ever since. Celine's gaze shifted past him. Kyle stood against the wall, still covered in blood, his silver eyes fixed on her with that same terrified intensity. Their eyes met and something shifted in the air between them. Not the warm pull of the mate bond. Something harder. More honest. The acknowledgement that everything between them had been broken and couldn't be fixed with pretty words or grand gestures. That maybe it had always been broken, from the very start, built on a foundation of resentment and obligation rather than choice. But also the understanding that they'd just fought side by side. That she'd saved his life, and he'd saved hers. That whatever they were or weren't to each other, they'd face death together and come out the other side. Lyra? Celine managed to ask. Dead, Ronan said. Kael made sure of it, burned her body to ash and scattered it so the dark blood magic couldn't resurrect her. Celine nodded weakly. And the attack? Repelled. Barely. Ronan's expression was grim. We lost about 80 warriors, another 100 wounded. The northern gate is destroyed and a quarter of the lower city burned. But you held long enough for my people to arrive and turn the tide. Your people helped? Ronan smiled slightly. You asked for aid. We came. That's what honor looks like. Kael made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been self-recrimination. Leave us, he said quietly. Please. Ronan looked at Celine. She nodded. The Northern Alpha stood and walked out, pausing only to grip her shoulder once in silent support. Then she and Kael were alone. He stayed against the wall, like he was afraid to come closer, like he didn't know if he had the right anymore. I'm sorry, he said finally. His voice was raw. For all of it. For leaving you on that battlefield. For protecting Lyra when I should have protected you. For making you feel like you had to earn something that should have been freely given. Celine stared at the ceiling. Words she'd wanted to hear for 2 years. Now they felt hollow. Too late. Why now? She asked. Why does it take me almost dying 3 times for you to see me? Because I'm an arrogant fool who thought he had all the time in the world to figure out what he wanted. Kael's hands clenched. I told myself the mate bond was enough. That we'd grow to care for each other eventually. That I didn't need to choose you because fate already had. But you wanted to choose Lyra. I wanted to choose myself, Kael said. I wanted to keep the illusion that I was in control, that my feelings mattered more than cosmic destiny. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I was just a pawn in someone else's game, and I was too blind to see it until it almost cost me everything. Selena turned her head to look at him. What do you want, Kael? I want to do better. Be better. He finally moved away from the wall, taking a few hesitant steps toward her bed. I want a chance to prove that tonight changed me, that watching you nearly die in my arms finally woke me up to what I've been throwing away. And if I don't want to give you that chance? The question hung in the air between them. Kael's face spasmed with pain, but he nodded slowly. Then I'll step down, let you lead as Luna without having to deal with a mate who failed you repeatedly. The pack respects you now, trusts you. They'd follow you. Celine closed her eyes. Part of her wanted that, wanted to punish him with rejection the way he'd punished her with indifference, wanted to watch him suffer the way she'd suffered for 2 years. But she was so tired, tired of anger, tired of pain, tired of holding grudges that only poisoned her own soul. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm willing to see if we can build something new from the ruins, something honest instead of obligatory." Kale's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means no more lies. No more protecting each other's feelings at the cost of truth. It means you treat me like an equal partner, or we end this bond permanently and figure out how to lead separately." She opened her eyes and met his gaze. "I'm done being the Luna who waits patiently while her mate figures out what he wants. From now on, you choose me every day or you lose me for good. Those are the terms." "Understood," Kyle said immediately. "I can work with that. Good. Now get out. I need to rest." He hesitated, then nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Celine?" "What?" "Thank you. For saving my life, for not giving up on the pack even when I gave up on you." His voice dropped. "You're the strongest person I know, and I'm sorry it took me almost losing you to see it." Then he was gone. Celine lay in the healing room and stared at the ceiling. She'd survived, again, but this time felt different. This time she hadn't just survived the physical trauma. She'd survived the complete destruction of every illusion she'd held about her life and her mate and her place in the world. Everything she'd thought she knew had been revealed as fantasy or manipulation, and now she had to figure out how to build a reality from the ashes. The door opened quietly. Celine expected Astrid or maybe Marcus checking on her status. Instead, it was Vera, the young counselor who'd supported her before. "Luna," Vera said, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's something you need to know. Something I found in Lyra's quarters after the battle." "What?" Vera pulled out a leather journal and handed it to Celine. Her diary. "It details everything, the infiltration, the plan, her brother's forces." She paused, and the names of others working with her, inside the pack. Celine's blood went cold. Others? 3 counselors, 2 high-ranking warriors. And Vera's face was pale. And someone in the royal household. Someone close to the Alpha King who's been feeding information to the rogues for years. Who? "I don't know. The entries are coded. But Luna, if there's still a traitor in the palace, if someone that close to the Alpha has been compromised." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to, because the implications were clear and terrifying. The attack tonight hadn't been the endgame. It had been a test, a way to gauge Shadowfang's defenses and weaknesses. The real assault was still coming, and they had a traitor in their inner circle who would make sure it succeeded. Celine sat up despite the pain screaming through her body. "Get Marcus, get Ronan, and do not tell anyone else about this. Not even Kyle. But Luna, especially not Kyle. If the traitor is someone close to him, someone he trusts, he might tip them off without meaning to." Celine took the journal with shaking hands. "We do this quietly. We root out the rot before it can spread further." Vera nodded and left quickly. Alone again, Celine opened the journal and began to read. What she found in those pages made her stomach turn. Names, dates, detailed reports of pack movements and defensive strategies. Lists of warriors who could be bribed or blackmailed or turned. Plans within plans, layers of deception that went back not just 5 years but decades. Lyra hadn't just infiltrated Shadowfang. She'd built an entire network of corruption that had been eating the pack alive from within since before Kyle became Alpha King, since his father's reign. And the traitor in the royal household, the one whose code name appeared over and over in the journal, was someone labeled only as the Crown's Shadow. Someone who had access to everything, who knew every secret, every weakness, every vulnerability. Someone who'd been helping orchestrate Shadowfang's downfall for longer than Celine had been alive. She sat there in the dim healing room, holding a journal that contained the evidence to save or destroy her pack, and realized with cold certainty that the battle tonight had been nothing. The real war was just beginning, and she had no idea who she could trust. The journal felt like it was burning a hole through Celine's hands. She sat in the healing room for another hour, reading every entry 3 times, memorizing names and dates and coded references until her eyes blurred with exhaustion. The Crown's Shadow appeared in 57 entries spanning 4 years, always present at critical moments, always positioned to sabotage from within. Whoever this person was, They'd been instrumental in weakening Shadowfang's defenses, orchestrating internal conflicts, and ensuring Lyra had access to information that should have been locked away in the Alpha King's most secure vaults. The door opened and Marcus entered quietly. His armor was still dented and blood-stained from the battle. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. "Luna," he said, "you should be resting." "I'll rest when we're not one betrayal away from total destruction." Celine gestured for him to close the door. "Sit down, Marcus. We need to talk." The beta's eyes narrowed as he took in her expression. "What's wrong?" She handed him the journal. "Read the entries I've marked. Then tell me if you recognize the pattern." Marcus flipped through the pages, his face growing darker with each entry. When he reached the sections about the crown's shadow, his hands started shaking. "This can't be real," he muttered. "Someone this close to Kael feeding information to rogues for years? We would have noticed. Would we?" Celine's voice was hard. "We didn't notice Lyra was a plant, didn't notice the dark blood corruption spreading through the pack, didn't notice dozens of small sabotages that weakened us from within." She leaned forward despite the pain. "We've been blind, Marcus, all of us. Too focused on external threats to see the rot at our core." The beta set the journal down like it might bite him. "What do you want to do?" "Figure out who the Crown Shadow is before they can do more damage." Celine pulled out a piece of parchment. Based on the journal entries, this person has access to the Alpha King's private chambers, attends high-level strategy meetings, and knows the schedule of every warrior rotation. That narrows it down to maybe a dozen people. Marcus nodded slowly. "Council members, senior warriors, and household staff with royal access." "And you," Celine added quietly. The beta's head snapped up. "Luna, I'm not accusing you, but I have to consider everyone." She held his gaze. "You were conveniently absent during both assassination attempts. You're the one who smuggled me out to Ronin. You have access to everything Kael knows. If I was the traitor, you'd be dead right now." Marcus's voice was flat. "I've had 100 opportunities to kill you over the past month. Hell, I could have let the poison finish you tonight instead of riding like a demon to get Ronin here. I know, that's why you're one of 3 people I'm trusting with this information." Celine softened slightly. "But we need to be methodical. No assumptions. No blind faith. Because whoever the Crown Shadow is, they're good enough to have hidden for years. Who are the other 2 you're trusting?" "Ronin and Astrid. They have no stake in Shadowfang politics and no reason to want us destroyed." She paused. "I'm not telling Kael yet." "Luna, you have to tell the Alpha King." "Do I?" Celine's eyes were hard. "The journal suggests the Crown's Shadow is someone Kael trusts implicitly, someone he'd never suspect. If I tell him now, he might unconsciously tip them off. Or worse, refuse to believe it and shut down the investigation entirely. That's a dangerous game you're playing. Everything about this situation is dangerous." Celine took the journal back. "So we do this quietly. We investigate every person with royal access. We look for financial records, unusual communications, anything that might indicate betrayal. And we do it fast, because according to Lyra's last entries, the final assault is planned for the next blood moon." Marcus's face went pale. "That's in 3 days." "Exactly. Which means we have 72 hours to root out a traitor who's been hiding successfully for years, prepare defenses against an army we barely survived once, and somehow hold this pack together while doing it." Celine stood shakily, ignoring the way her body screamed in protest. "So let's stop wasting time." Over the next 12 hours, Celine became someone she barely recognized. The gentle Luna who'd tried to please everyone was gone, replaced by something colder and more ruthless. She questioned warriors with surgical precision, reviewed financial records until her eyes ached, cross-referenced patrol schedules with attack timings to identify patterns, and slowly, pieces started falling into place. 3 council members had received mysterious payments in the months before major pack incidents. 2 senior warriors had relatives in territories controlled by rogue factions, and several household staff had made unexplained trips to border towns where messages could be passed to enemy agents. But none of it pointed definitively to the Crown's Shadow. Whoever they were, they'd been careful. Meticulous. Smart enough to use intermediaries and cutouts so their hands stayed clean. Celine was reviewing guard rotation schedules when Kael found her in the war room around dawn the next day. "You should be in bed," he said without preamble. "So should you." She didn't look up from the documents. When's the last time you slept? About as recently as you. He came closer, studying the papers spread across the table. What are you doing? My job. Defending this pack. By exhausting yourself while you're still recovering from poison? That's not defense, that's suicide. Then I'll die doing something useful instead of lying in a bed waiting for the next attack. Celine finally met his eyes. We barely survived last night, KL. We lost 80 warriors and a quarter of the lower city. If they come at us again with the same force, we won't hold. I know. His voice was grim. I've sent messages to every allied pack requesting reinforcements. Most are days away, but they might arrive in time to bury our bodies. Celine cut him off. We need a different strategy, something they won't expect. Like what? Like going on the offense. She pulled out a map marked with symbols. According to intelligence Ronan gathered, Lyra's brother Darius is camped about 30 miles northeast in the Shadowmere border territories. He's regrouping his forces, treating his wounded, preparing for the next assault. And you want to attack him while he's vulnerable? KL studied the map. That's risky. If we send warriors outside our borders, it weakens our defenses here. Staying defensive hasn't worked. We're bleeding resources and morale. But if we hit them hard, disrupt their command structure, kill or capture their leader, we might buy enough time for reinforcements to arrive. Celine traced the route with her finger. Ronan's people know the terrain. They can guide a strike force in and out before Darius knows what hit him. Kale was quiet for a long moment. It could work. Or it could be a disaster that gets half our remaining warriors killed. Everything's a risk now. Celine met his gaze. But doing nothing guarantees we lose. At least this way we're making them react to us instead of the other way around. You're right, KL nodded slowly. When do we leave? We? Celine raised an eyebrow. You're the Alpha King. You can't risk yourself on a raid. Like hell I can't. His voice was firm. I'm done sitting in strategy rooms while others fight my battles. If we're doing this, I'm leading the strike force personally. Then I'm coming too. Absolutely not. You're still recovering. So are you. And I'm not letting you walk into a trap without backup. Celine crossed her arms. Besides, I've been training with Ronan. I can hold my own now. Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Kyle sighed. You're not going to back down, are you? Not a chance. Fine. But you stay close to me during the fighting, and if things go wrong, you run. Understood? If things go wrong, we both run. Celine's voice was steel. I'm done with this martyr complex where you think sacrificing yourself somehow makes up for past mistakes. We survive together, or not at all. Something flickered in Kyle's eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or respect? Agreed, he said quietly. They spent the next hours planning the raid with military precision. Ronan contributed intelligence about the terrain and Darius's likely defensive positions. Marcus selected 40 of their best warriors who could move fast and hit hard. Astrid prepared medical supplies for injuries they'd inevitably sustain. And through it all, Celine kept one eye on every person in the room, watching for signs of betrayal. For someone who seemed too interested in the plans, who asked questions that probed too deeply into their strategy. But everyone acted normal, professional, loyal, which meant the Crown's shadow was either not present or extraordinarily good at hiding. As the strike force assembled in the courtyard that evening, Celine found herself standing beside Ronan while he checked his weapons. This is insane, you know, the Northern Alpha said conversationally, attacking a fortified rogue position with minimal forces while your own territory is still vulnerable. I know. And you're doing it anyway because sitting and waiting feels like dying slowly. Something like that. Celine adjusted the armor Astrid had modified to fit her smaller frame. Do you think we can win? Ronan looked at her with those pale green eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. I think you can survive, which is different from winning, but sometimes more important. Survival is victory. That's bleak. That's reality. He shouldered his pack. The question isn't whether you'll win tonight. It's whether you'll make the hard choices when the moment comes. Whether you'll sacrifice pieces to save the whole. What if the piece is me? Then someone else leads. Ronan's voice was matter-of-fact. Packs are bigger than any single wolf, Luna. Even you. Even him. He nodded toward Kyle, who was addressing the warriors.
The moment you think you're indispensable is the moment you become a liability. The words stung, but Celine recognized the truth in them. She wasn't special, wasn't irreplaceable. Just another wolf trying to keep her pack alive in a world that wanted to tear them apart. And maybe that was enough. The strike force moved out under cover of darkness. They traveled in wolf form for speed, 40 shapes flowing through the forest like shadows. Celine ran beside Kael, her smaller wolf keeping pace despite the lingering weakness in her limbs. The bond between them thrummed with shared adrenaline and fear and grim determination. No words were needed. They were united in purpose, even if nothing else had been resolved between them. Ronan led them along routes that avoided rogue patrols and natural choke points. 3 hours of hard running brought them to a ridge overlooking Darius's encampment. Celine shifted back to human form and studied the scene below with growing dread. The camp was bigger than intelligence had suggested. Easily 200 rogues, maybe more, arranged in a defensive perimeter around central command tents. Fires burned at regular intervals, providing light and warmth. Guards patrolled in organized rotations. This wasn't a ragtag band of rogues. This was a disciplined army. "We're outnumbered 5-1, Marcus muttered beside her. "This is suicide." "No," Kael said slowly. "This is opportunity." He pointed to the largest tent at the camp's center. "That's where their command structure will be, Darius and his lieutenants. If we can take them out, the rest will scatter." "Getting to that tent means going through 200 hostile rogues," Ronan pointed out. "Your 40 warriors are good, but they're not that good. We don't need to fight all 200. Celine studied the camp layout, an idea forming. "We create a diversion, draw most of their forces to one side of the camp. While they're distracted, a small team slips in and hits the command tent. A suicide mission," Marcus said flatly. "Whoever goes in won't come back out. Then we make sure they do." Kael's voice was firm. "Ronan, can your people create enough chaos on the western perimeter to pull their attention?" The Northern Alpha nodded slowly. "We'll give you 10 minutes. Maybe 15 if we're lucky. After that, they'll realize it's a feint and flood back to protect their leaders." 10 minutes. Celine looked at Kael. "That's enough time if we move fast." "We?" Kael's eyes narrowed. "You're not going into that camp." "Yes, I am. Because you'll need someone to watch your back. Someone you trust. And right now, that's me." She saw him start to argue, saw the refusal forming on his lips. But something in her expression stopped him. Maybe he recognized that she'd already made up her mind, that trying to protect her now would only insult everything she'd survived to get here. "All right," he said finally. "You and me. Marcus, you're in command of the main force. When you hear the signal, pull back and regroup at the northern ridge. Don't wait for us." "Alpha," Marcus started. "That's an order." Kael's voice was absolute. "If we don't make it out, the pack needs you alive to lead them." The beta's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They spent the next 20 minutes coordinating the attack. Ronan would lead 20 warriors in a frontal assault on the western perimeter, using noise and fire to create maximum confusion. While the rogues responded to that threat, Kael and Celine would slip in from the east with 3 of their best fighters, hit the command tent, and extract before the enemy realized what was happening. It was a plan with 1,000 ways to fail and maybe 1 way to succeed. But it was better than waiting to be slaughtered. As they prepared to move into position, Celine found herself standing beside Kael in the darkness. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly, "if we don't make it out—" "We'll make it out," Kael interrupted, "but if we don't—" She met his eyes. "I need you to know that despite everything, despite all the pain and betrayal, I don't regret the bond. I just regret that it took almost losing each other to figure out what we could have been." Kael's hand found hers in the darkness, squeezing once. "We'll have time to figure it out. After tonight. After we've survived this. You promise?" "I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Promises meant nothing when you were about to walk into an enemy camp outnumbered and outgunned. But sometimes lies were kinder than truth. Ronan's forces attacked exactly on schedule. The western side of the camp erupted in chaos as warriors poured through the perimeter, howling battle cries and setting tents ablaze. Rogues scrambled to respond, rushing toward the threat with weapons drawn. In the confusion, Kael and Celine slipped through the eastern fence line with their 3 fighters, Sarah, a male named Finn, and another female named Kira.
They moved low and fast, taking advantage of shadows and smoke to stay hidden. The command tent loomed ahead, larger than Celine had realized from the ridge. 2 guards stood at the entrance, alert but focused on the commotion to the west. Celine moved first, trusting her smaller size and training. She came up behind the left guard silently, drove her blade between his ribs, and lowered him to the ground before he could cry out. Kael took the right guard with similar efficiency. They pushed through the tent flap. Inside, 3 males stood around a war table covered in maps and tactical reports. The largest, a massive male with dark hair shot through with gray, looked up with crimson eyes that marked him as dark blood corrupted. Darius Blackthorn, Celine realized. Lyra's brother looked at them and smiled. Well, he said pleasantly, this is unexpected. The great Alpha King Kael Draven walking straight into my tent. He tilted his head. Did you really think I wouldn't anticipate this? Celine's blood went cold. Behind them, the tent flap burst open and 20 rogues poured in, surrounding them completely. It had been a trap. They'd walked right into it. Ronan's assault wasn't drawing forces away. It was keeping Kael's reinforcements busy, while Darius closed the snare around the Alpha King and Luna personally. You see, Darius continued conversationally, my sister might be dead, but she left me one final gift before your mate ended her. He pulled out a familiar-looking leather journal. Her diary. With every plan, every piece of intelligence, every weakness in your pack laid out for me to exploit. That's impossible, Kael said. That journal is in your Luna's possession? Darius laughed. Was in her possession. Until someone took it from her rooms and delivered it to me this morning. He set the journal down. Someone you trust implicitly. Someone who's been feeding me information for years. The Crown's shadow. Celine felt the world tilt. Someone had stolen the journal from her chambers while she'd been in the war room. Someone with access to the royal wing. Someone who'd known exactly where to look and when, and then delivered it straight to the enemy. You should see your faces, Darius said with amusement. That dawning horror as you realize you've been betrayed by one of your own. That everyone you trust might be the knife aimed at your back. He gestured to his rogues. Take them alive. Killing them quickly would waste such a perfect opportunity. The rogues moved in. Kael and Celine fought back to back, blades flashing in the dim tent light. Sarah, Finn, and Kira fought beside them with desperate ferocity, but they were outnumbered 4-1 and more rogues kept pouring in. Celine felt claws rake across her ribs, felt her own blade find purchase in enemy flesh. The tent became a press of bodies and blood and snarling chaos. She lost track of individual opponents, just fought with animal instinct to stay alive one more second. Beside her, Kael moved like death incarnate, but even his strength had limits. She saw him take a blade to the shoulder, saw blood spray across his face. We need to retreat, she gasped. Can't. Too many. Kael's voice was strained. Going to have to fight our way out. A rogue grabbed Celine from behind, arms locking around her in a crushing grip. She threw her head back, felt his nose break, twisted free and drove her elbow into his throat. He went down choking, but 3 more took his place. They were going to die here. Going to be overwhelmed and captured and used as leverage against the pack. Everything they'd fought for would be for nothing. Unless... Celine's eyes found the oil lamps hanging from the tent poles, found the papers and maps scattered across the war table, found the powder kegs stacked in the corner, supplies for the coming assault. She caught Kael's eye and tilted her head toward the lamps. Understanding flashed across his face, followed immediately by horror. No, he mouthed. But Celine had already made up her mind. Sometimes survival meant sacrifice. Sometimes the only way to save the whole was to lose a piece, even if that piece was her. She broke away from Kael, dodging through the press of rogues toward the nearest lamp, grabbed it and hurled it at the powder kegs before anyone could stop her. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic. The entire eastern side of the tent erupted in flames. Rogues screamed as fire consumed them. The blast wave threw Celine backward into Kael's arms, and suddenly they were stumbling through smoke and burning canvas toward what she hoped was an exit. Behind them, Darius's enraged howl rose above the chaos. After them! Don't let them escape! But the fire was spreading fast, turning the command tent into an inferno. Rogues scattered in panic, more concerned with survival than capture. Kael dragged Celine through a tear in the burning canvas, and they emerged into cold night air. Sarah and Kira stumbled out behind them, singed and bleeding. Finn didn't make it. "Run," Kyle ordered. "Now!" They ran through the camp as it descended into chaos around them. The diversion had become real panic as fire spread from the command tent to surrounding structures. Rogues ran in every direction, trying to organize a response, trying to find their leaders, trying to survive. In the confusion, 5 wolves disappeared into the forest. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. Ran until they reached the rendezvous point where Marcus and the others waited. The beta's face flooded with relief when he saw them. "Thank the gods. We thought you'd lost us," Kyle managed between gasping breaths. "Almost did." "What happened?" Marcus demanded. "Trap," Celine said shortly. "Darius knew we were coming, had the journal, knew everything. The implications hung heavy in the night air. Someone from inside the palace had delivered critical intelligence to the enemy less than 12 hours ago. Someone who'd had access to Celine's private chambers. Someone who'd known exactly where she'd hidden Lyra's diary. And that someone was still back in Shadowfang, positioned to do even more damage. "We need to get back," Kale said grimly. "Now, before whoever the traitor is can cause more problems." The journey back took 4 hours of brutal running. They arrived at Shadowfang just before dawn to find the palace in controlled chaos. Astrid met them at the gates, her face grim. "We have a problem." "Another one?" Celine asked bitterly. "What now? 3 council members are dead, poisoned during dinner last night." She paused. "And someone tried to break into the treasury. They didn't succeed, but the guards who stopped them were killed." "Who tried to break in?" Kael demanded. "We don't know. They used dark blood magic to cloud their features. But whoever it was knew the guard rotation and where the treasury keys were kept." Astrid looked between them. "Someone inside the palace is actively sabotaging us, and they're getting bolder." Celine exchanged a look with Kael. They were running out of time. The traitor knew they were getting close and was accelerating their plans. "Lock down the palace," Kael ordered. "No one enters or leaves without my explicit permission. I want every person with royal access accounted for and their movements tracked. That's going to cause panic," Marcus warned. "Good. Let it cause panic." Kael's voice was hard. "Because whoever the crowned shadow is, they're about to find out what happens when they threaten my pack." He turned and strode toward the palace, warriors falling into step behind him. Celine followed, her mind racing. They had maybe 2 days before the blood moon. 2 days to root out a traitor who'd been hiding successfully for years. 2 days to prepare defenses against an army they'd barely survived the first time. 2 days to save everything or lose it all. She reached the war room and stopped short. Sitting on the strategy table, positioned exactly where Kael would see it when he entered, was a sealed letter. Celine's hand trembled as she picked it up. The wax seal bore a symbol she didn't recognize, a crown pierced by a dagger. The crown's shadow. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The message inside was brief and written in elegant script. "You're looking for me in all the wrong places, little Luna. I'm not your enemy. I'm your only hope of survival. The blood moon rises tomorrow night. When it does, an army 3 times larger than what you faced will descend upon Shadowfang. Your walls will fall. Your warriors will die. Everything you fought for will burn. Unless you meet me. Alone. At midnight tonight in the ruins of the old Western Tower. Come alone or don't come at all. This is your only chance to save them." It was signed simply, "A Friend." Celine stared at the letter as the implications sank in. The crowned shadow wanted to meet, wanted to reveal themselves, but only to her, alone, in a location far from help or backup. It was obviously a trap, but it was also possibly the only way to get ahead of whatever was coming. Behind her, she heard Kael enter the room, heard his sharp intake of breath as he saw the letter in her hands. "Celine, what is that?" She turned to face him, her decision already made. "It's an invitation," she said quietly, "and I'm going to accept it." Kael's eyes went wide with horror. "Absolutely not. That's suicide." "Everything we've done for the past 3 days has been suicide," Celine interrupted. "And we're still here, still fighting." She held up the letter. "Whoever the crowned shadow is, they have information we need. Intelligence about the coming attack, maybe even a way to stop it. Or it's bait to lure you into a kill zone." "Probably." She met his gaze steadily. But I'm going anyway. Because sitting here waiting for the end isn't an option. Then I'm coming with you. No. The letter says alone. If I show up with backup, they'll disappear and we'll have lost our only advantage. Celine's voice was firm. You stay here, coordinate defenses, prepare the pack for what's coming, and if I don't come back, you lead them through it. Kale looked like she'd stabbed him. You're asking me to let you walk into certain death. I'm asking you to trust me, to believe that I'm strong enough to handle this. She stepped closer. You said you wanted to do better, to be better. This is your chance. Let me do what needs to be done without trying to protect me from my own choices. Their eyes locked. In that moment, Celine saw everything pass across Kael's face. Fear, anger, reluctance, and finally, agonizing acceptance. All right, he said hoarsely. But you take this. He pulled a small blade from his belt and pressed it into her hand. It's coated with concentrated antidote for dark blood poison. One scratch will purge most corruptions. And you take a communication crystal so I can track your location. Deal. And Celine? His hand caught hers. Come back to me. We haven't finished figuring out what we could be. I'll do my best. She left the war room before he could argue further, before her own fear could override her determination. The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. Celine prepared methodically, checked her weapons, reviewed the layout of the Western Tower ruins, tried not to think about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. As the midnight hour approached, she slipped out of the palace through a servant's entrance, moved through the darkened streets of Shadowfang toward the abandoned Western District. The tower ruins rose against the night sky like broken teeth. Once it had been a watchtower, part of the original fortifications before the palace expanded. Now it was just crumbling stone and bad memories. Celine climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before trusting it with her weight. Reached the top level where moonlight filtered through gaps in the collapsed roof. And waited. Midnight came and went. Nothing happened. Celine's hand tightened on her blade. Had she been wrong? Was this just a distraction to pull her away from the palace while something else happened? Then a voice spoke from the shadows behind her. Hello, Celine. She spun, weapon raised. A figure stepped into the moonlight. And Celine's world shattered for the third time in as many days. Because the crowned shadow, the traitor who'd been sabotaging Shadowfang for years, who'd enabled Lyra's infiltration and orchestrated countless betrayals, wasn't a stranger. It was Marcus, her loyal beta, Kael's second-in-command, the one person she'd trusted without reservation. He stood there with his hands raised placatingly, his familiar face wearing an expression of profound regret. Before you do anything, he said quietly, you need to hear the truth. All of it. Because everything you think you know about the situation is wrong. Celine's blade didn't waver. Start talking. And in the ruins of the Western Tower, with the blood moon rising on the horizon and an army gathering in the darkness, Marcus began to speak. What he revealed would change everything Celine thought she knew about loyalty, about Pack, about the very foundations of the world she'd been fighting to save. And by the time he finished, she would have to make a choice that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everyone she'd sworn to protect. The silence after Marcus spoke felt like the moment before an avalanche. Celine stood in the ruins of the Western Tower, blade still raised, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. The moonlight cast harsh shadows across Marcus's face, making him look older than she'd ever seen him. You're lying, she said finally. Her voice came out steady despite the chaos rioting inside her chest. I wish I was. Marcus's hands remained raised, non-threatening, but his eyes held a weariness that spoke of years carrying unbearable weight. But everything I just told you is the truth, the whole ugly truth that your mate has been hiding from you since before you ever met. Kael knew? The words tasted like ash. He knew you were feeding information to the rogues? No. Marcus shook his head slowly. He knew why I had to. He knew what would happen if I didn't, and he made the choice to let me continue because the alternative was worse. Celine's blade wavered slightly. Explain. From the beginning. And if I don't believe you, I'm taking your head back to Kael myself. Fair enough. Marcus lowered his hands carefully and moved to sit on a crumbling section of wall. His posture screamed exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying secrets that ate you alive from the inside. 8 years ago, he began, his voice rough, there was a pack called Ironwood. Small territory, maybe 300 wolves, situated between Shadowfang and the rogue territories to the east. They were neutral ground, peacekeepers who refused to take sides in the endless territorial disputes. I've heard of them, Celine said. They were massacred. Everyone assumed it was rogues. It was rogues, but not random ones. Marcus's jaw tightened. It was Darius Blackthorn's forces, back before he'd built his current army, back when he was just an angry exile with a grudge and a talent for dark blood magic. He paused. My sister lived in Ironwood. She'd married into the pack 5 years prior, had 2 children, a boy and a girl. The way he said it, past tense, weighted with grief, made Celine's stomach drop. When Darius attacked, the Ironwood Alpha sent out distress calls to every neighboring pack, begged for help, promised alliances, resources, anything in exchange for warriors to defend them. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Kael's father was Alpha King then. He received the call, knew exactly what was happening, and he refused to send help. Why? Celine whispered. Politics. The old Alpha King didn't want to commit resources to a pack that had no strategic value. Didn't want to risk Shadowfang warriors for wolves who'd spent decades refusing to pledge formal allegiance. Marcus's voice went flat, so he let them die. 300 wolves slaughtered over 2 days while neighboring packs did nothing. My sister, my nephews. Gone because helping them wasn't politically convenient. Celine felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring them back. Marcus looked up at her with hollow eyes. When Kael became Alpha King 2 years later, I confronted him, told him his father's choice had cost me everything I loved, asked him what he planned to do differently. What did he say? He said he couldn't change the past, but he could prevent it from happening again, that he'd never let political calculation override protecting innocent lives. Marcus's laugh was bitter. Noble words. But I'd learned that words mean nothing when weighed against survival and power. So you became a traitor. I became insurance. Marcus stood slowly. 6 months after Kael took the throne, Darius sent me a message. Said he knew about my sister, knew about my hatred for the Draven line, offered me a choice, work with him to bring down Shadowfang from within, or watch as he turned his attention to the surviving members of my family scattered across various packs. He threatened them. He had them. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. My mother, 2 cousins, my sister's children who'd survived because they were visiting relatives during the massacre. He had proof. Locations. Plans for how he'd kill them if I refused. He paused. So I agreed. Started passing information. Small things at first. Guard rotations, supply routes. Nothing that would cause immediate harm, but enough to satisfy him that I was committed. And Kael found out. 3 years ago. Marcus met her eyes. I thought I'd been careful, but he's sharper than his father ever was. Confronted me in private. Had every piece of evidence needed to execute me for treason. I thought my life was over, but he didn't execute you. No. He gave me a choice. Marcus's voice went quiet. He said he could have me killed and Darius would murder my family in retaliation. Or I could continue feeding information, but information Kael controlled. False intelligence mixed with enough truth to keep Darius believing I was compromised. Turn my betrayal into a weapon we could use against them. You became a double agent. I became a dead man walking. For 3 years, I've been playing both sides, feeding Darius carefully crafted lies, while trying to keep Shadowfang from falling apart. Every piece of intelligence I passed was designed to make the rogues underestimate us, to lure them into tactical errors, to buy time for Kael to build defenses they didn't know about. Marcus's hand shook slightly. And every day I woke up knowing that if Darius figured it out, if I made one wrong move, my family would die screaming. Celine lowered her blade slightly, her mind reeling. The journal. You took it from my chambers and gave it to Darius. I took it and brought it to Kael first. We went through it together, identified the real intelligence versus the planted information. Then I delivered a modified version to Darius. One that confirmed what he wanted to believe, that you'd gone north and gathered evidence, but that we were too fractured internally to respond effectively. Marcus pulled out a second journal from his coat. This is the real one. Everything Lyra actually wrote, including the names of rogues in Darius's inner circle who are vulnerable to bribery or blackmail. And the attack tonight, going into Darius's camp, was supposed to capture him before he could launch the Blood Moon assault. The trap was anticipated. Kale and I planned for it. What we didn't plan for was you nearly immolating yourself to create an escape route. Marcus's voice held grudging respect. That was insane, by the way. It worked, didn't it? Barely. He studied her face in the moonlight. The question now is whether you believe me, whether you trust that everything I've done, all the lies and deception and betrayal, was in service of protecting what's left of my family and giving Shadowfang a chance to survive. Celine thought about it, weighed his words against the evidence she'd gathered, the patterns she'd seen. Thought about Kael's strange reactions to her investigation, the way he'd seemed more worried about her methods than her conclusions. It fit. Horribly, perfectly, it all fit together into a picture of two men carrying impossible secrets because acknowledging them publicly would destroy everything they were trying to protect. The Blood Moon assault, she said finally. Tell me about the real plan. Marcus exhaled slowly, relief evident in his posture. Darius is bringing his full force tomorrow night. 800 rogues, all enhanced with dark blood corruption. They'll hit every gate simultaneously, overwhelming our defenses through sheer numbers. We can't hold against that. No, but we're not trying to hold. Marcus pulled out a map and spread it on the broken wall. We're going to let them in. Celine's eyes widened. That's suicide. That's strategy. He traced lines on the map. The moment they breach the outer walls, we fall back to pre-established positions in the inner city. Turn the streets into a killing ground where their numbers work against them. Bottleneck them in alleys and courtyards where our warriors have the advantage. Urban warfare. Exactly. And while they're grinding through the city, Ronan's forces, who've been moving into position for the past 2 days, will hit them from behind, trap them between two forces in terrain they don't know. Marcus looked up at her. It's brutal, and we'll still lose people. But it gives us a chance. And Darius? Will be targeted specifically. Kill the head and the body dies. Without him, the rogue coalition falls apart into infighting and territory disputes. Marcus's expression was grim. That's where you come in. Me? You're the only one who's gotten close to him twice and survived. You know how he moves, how he thinks, and according to Ronan's intelligence, he's specifically hunting for you. Sees you as the symbol of everything he's trying to destroy. The Luna who refused to break, who came back stronger, who represents Shadowfang's resilience. So I'm bait. You're the weapon we've been sharpening for a month without realizing it. Marcus met her eyes steadily. But only if you're willing. I won't force you into a suicide mission. Everything we've done has been a suicide mission, Celine said, echoing her own words from earlier. And we're still here. She looked down at the map, committing the positions to memory. What does Kael think about using me as bait? Marcus's silence was answer enough. He doesn't know, Celine said flatly. He'd never agree to it. The beta's voice was quiet. He's already lost too much to the idea of protecting you instead of trusting you. But you and I both know that sometimes the people we love have to make choices we'd never want them to make. That's what leadership means. The words settled heavy in the space between them. Celine thought about everything she'd survived to get here. The abandonment, the poison, the betrayals and revelations and brutal truths about the world she lived in. Thought about the Luna she'd been when this started. Soft and desperate for approval. Willing to make herself small so others would feel big. That woman was dead, had died bleeding in the mud while her mate chose someone else. What had risen from those ashes was something harder, something that understood that strength wasn't about never breaking, but about what you built from the shattered pieces. All right, she said, tell me the plan. They spent the next hour going over every detail, positions and fallback points and signals that would coordinate movements across the battlefield. The risks were astronomical, but the alternative was waiting passively for extinction. As false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Marcus stood to leave. One more thing, Celine said. Your family, the ones Darius has been holding over you. Where are they now? Safe. Marcus's voice held quiet satisfaction. Ronan extracted them 3 days ago while everyone was distracted by the first attack. They're in the northern territories under heavy guard. beyond Darius's reach.